Test one. That's pretty good.
Minister Governance and Priorities Committee meeting order for Monday, December 7th, 2020. At this time, we will take a silent moment of personal reflection. As a reminder, all members of council are obligated to declare a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest as per section 133 of the Lloydminster Charter regarding any item on this agenda. This meeting is for discussion and information gathering only. All decisions will occur during regular council meetings. We thank all of our presenters for their time. I'll be the first to declare I am going to be losing myself from 6.1 under governance and priorities matters. Any other matters to be noted? None noted at this time. I will move to the approval of the agenda. I'll look for a recommendation from council.
Yep. Your worship.
Certainly. Councillor Fagin. Councillor Whiting.
I'll move that the agenda dated December 7th, 2020 be approved.
Seconder? Councillor Bagman, thank you very much. Is there any further discussion to those minutes before I call for the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item number 3, the approval of the previous meeting minutes. I'll look for direction from council. Councillor Thorson.
I move that the Governance and Priorities Committee minutes dated November 23rd, 2020 be approved.
Thank you, Councillor. Look for a seconder. Councillor Buckingham, thank you very much. Is there any further discussion on those minutes before I call for the question? Not seeing any, I'll call it. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 4, public presentations. I'm not aware of any, but public presentations. Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, City Manager Administration Reports 2021 draft meeting schedule.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. For 5.1 2021 draft meeting schedule, I'll ask the City Clerk Doug Rodwell to present.
Thank you, Your Worship, Council. The item before you is the 2021 draft meeting schedule, and is to provide the committee with the draft 2021 meeting schedules for review and discussion. Procedure bylaw provides that for City Council to establish the schedules for the upcoming year's council and committee meetings before December 31st of each year. Historically, meetings have been held on Monday. However, administration has received a request to explore the possibility of moving meetings to Tuesday. Administration has prepared 2 draft 2021 meeting schedules for the committee to review, one showing Monday meetings and the other showing the Tuesday meetings. The 2021 meeting schedule will be brought forward on the 14th of December regular council meeting for decision approval. Amendments can be made to the meeting schedule at any time by resolution at a future meeting. And I'll pass it back to you, Your Worship, and answer any questions of council.
Thank you, City Clerk. Questions or comments of the City Clerk? Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm certainly in favor of keeping the meetings on a Monday. I know from working a full-time job and doing this as well that it's certainly nice to do a council meeting on a Monday so you can get down to the rest of your work for Tuesday to Friday. So I would certainly be in favor of bringing back the Monday recommendation.
Councillor Whiting.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this. Personally, I have some selfishness that I would like to see Tuesdays as an option, given that I spend Monday noon at a Rotary meeting, and it would give me the opportunity to be more involved with that and not be rushed to get to council. I also wonder if there's an opportunity, if it would assist in having a weekend or at least a day to come back to after a weekend to get further caught up and ask any questions before getting into whether it's a council or governance priorities meetings on a Tuesday. So that's me selfishly, and I would look to administration to see if there's any negative effects of moving to a Tuesday versus a Monday, or any benefits to moving to a Tuesday to a Monday.
I'll look to City Clerk or City Manager, whoever wishes to reply. City Manager.
I think both comments already made are speak to both days, where Mondays you get it out of the way and you got the rest of the week to go. There are some benefits to Tuesdays, preparation. If you are on holidays, you get that Monday to prepare when you get back, or versus if you're off the week before, you're coming back to a Monday council meeting. It's my understanding prior to the previous council that this was presented to council and they chose the Mondays, but administration would work with whatever council's schedules permit. There are pros and cons to each way, and I'm not sure, there's one that supersedes another, but there's definite benefits to both options.
Thank you, City Manager. Any other comments from council? Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not necessarily related to the Monday or Tuesday item, but just we've listed conferences on here, but I noticed that AUMA is not listed on there, and I am assuming that's for a specific reason.
I can actually answer that one. I think it is scheduled for November, but it hasn't had the date set because the municipal elections occur this October in Alberta for every community and municipality outside of Lloydminster. They haven't set the date yet for the November convention. I'm anticipating the 24th through the 26th of November, but that's just, I don't have anything more to guide than just a guess based on the past.
Okay, thank you. I was just double checking because it wasn't on there. Other than that, to me, the schedule looks good in terms of where we've got the meetings lined up, and I don't think we've run into any holiday issues or anything like that sometimes we've had to move them around a little bit in the past. The question of Mondays or Tuesdays, at the end of the day, I'll move my schedule around for whatever we end up doing. But at this point in my life, I have made everything work so that Mondays work for a council meeting. So I'd have to go back to the drawing board as far as how all the balls that I have in the air are managed. So it's just a question of, am I going back to the drawing board or sticking with what I know works right now?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Your Worship. And so if there was a good reason to move to Tuesdays that would accommodate city business, I certainly would support that. But like the other councillors have mentioned, I have arranged my whole schedule and moved all of my Monday meetings for my work to Tuesdays. So not that I can't change it back, but certainly it would take some work to rearrange the schedule. So,
thank you, Councillor. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I think to your point about the AUMA conference being the 24th to the 26th, that's a good example of why I would want to keep it on the Monday, the 22nd, because it may seem weird, but to be gone from the 23rd to the 26th from a full-time job as opposed to being in council Monday, working the 23rd, and then going to AUMA, for example, that's a good example of why I like the Monday.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Councillor Fagnan? Yeah, I think that. Oh, Councillor Dashak.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I guess the question to admin, would we still get our, packages on Thursday? Because for me, that's kind of, the Sunday morning is I'm up early on Sunday when everybody's still asleep, and 5:30 or 6 I get up, and that's my quiet time when I go through the package. And if there's other stuff, I set aside time on Sunday. So I have that time available to me. I know that Monday is not I won't have any time at all if I have to go and look at the package. It's going to be delayed. So that's one of the things around the Monday, but I'm willing to try it either way. So
If I may, whether the date's on Monday or Tuesday would make no difference on when the packages are released, whether to council or to the public. Obviously, the public has so many days with the package, so we wouldn't release them on Saturday. We'd still release it on the Friday, so they may have an extra day with the package. We move to a Tuesday, and council's release on the Wednesday or the Thursday would still stay the same.
Councillor Thorson.
Just one other question, maybe as we look into this more. I know that the County of Vermilion River, they do their meetings on Tuesdays, but do we know whether Wilton or Britannia are Monday or Tuesdays? Just, in cases where we have things going concurrently where it would make sense for them to all happen at the same time, because otherwise we're watching each other's meetings or listening in on each other's meetings to kind of see what happened. That, I don't know. I wonder if there's some
Councillor Buckingham.
thoughts on that.
Thank you, Worship. Britannia Council meets on Wednesdays, and I do believe Wilton is the same, opposite Wednesdays, but Wednesdays. But Britannia for sure is Wednesdays.
Councillor Marin.
just for consideration, perhaps this year, if, whatever the vote of council is to keep Mondays, that during the fall of next year, we start thinking about what we would like to recommend. And if we are looking for a date change, then that we consider it.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have, that structuring Mondays versus Tuesdays. And that was the question I had for administration, was exactly what was posed is, is it beneficial? And I think we can all express that being here most days, Monday's another day you pick up from the weekend. Sometimes it's very quiet. Other times it's very busy depending on the events of the weekend. I do like having the rest of the 4 days to try and get through again, start again the following Monday. So my preference would be to lean to Monday. No, I appreciate Councillor Whiting, and just it gives you a good excuse to get out of the meeting sooner, is what I found as a guest of Rotary. I just said, I'm sorry, I have to be excused and get up and leave. So That's been my benefit. City Clerk.
Just for the question of RM Wilton, it is the third Thursday of each month.
Third Thursday. Okay. Councillor Torreson.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think that what Councillor Marion suggested was, maybe the best idea is think about, whether or not moving into next year, whether we want to change the date up. This year I have a kindergartner whose school is arranged based on council, and I've got a 3-year-old whose pre-K is arranged around council. So I just think that, and my wife arranges her schedule around that. So I think it would definitely be a disadvantage, but it'd make it work the way I do everything else. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to look at next time when we kind of have time to plan for it, I guess.
Okay. Any other comments? Thinking we've given some direction to administration that they can work with to look forward to the next meeting. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 5.2. I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 5.2, amounts deemed uncollectible from utility accounts, I'll ask Don Stang to present.
Thank you, City Manager. Good afternoon, Your Worship, Council. Before you, we have a information report regarding amounts deemed uncollectible for utility accounts. City of Lloydminster issues invoices, obviously, for all services. Some of these invoices or portions of them become on account uncollectible for a variety of reasons. Before you, for the year of 2020, we have a list of 32 accounts that were uncollectible up until the date of November 30th, 2020. The collection process for Water Services Department for accounts up to $10 or less, we try or less are not pursued by internal collections, and they are deemed uncollectible and require council approval to write them off. There are some of those included in the 32. Number 2, accounts balance greater than $10 are first pursued by internal collections. The Water Service Department tries to collect the account holder to discuss their outstanding balance and make payment arrangements. And number 3, where internal collection efforts are unsuccessful, or accounts with final balances greater than $50 are sent to external collection company. If the collection company has not been able to collect the account within the year, the account is deemed uncollectible and requires council approval to write off, which is what we're bringing forward today for consideration. It should be noted that write-off amounts that are deemed uncollectible from utility accounts does not prevent the city from continuing to pursue collection activity on the account later if a new contact information becomes available. And furthermore, if the business or individual applies for a city utility service in the future, any unpaid balances from the previous accounts are to be paid in full before issuing a new account. The aged account write-offs are a small percentage of the revenue. Administration will bring a recommendation forward to a future regular council meeting for request to an authorization to write off the amounts deemed uncollectible from the utility accounts totaling $7,693.63, and that these amounts shall be written off for the 2020 fiscal period. I do believe the last time we brought admin report forward for write-offs was in the tune of 70,000-ish. So we've seen significant improvement here. This is where we're at for the 2020 year up until November 30th, 2020. I do have information on specific accounts if council wishes to ask any questions, and I'll pass it back to your worship if there's any questions.
Thank you, Executive Manager Stan. Councillor Torreson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple questions. One is, what is the effect, if any, do we believe, just from moving the deadlines of the penalties and things like that and having the deferral period for the utilities that we had earlier in the fall?
With regards to this uncollectible?
Just with regards to collections in general, these wouldn't be related to the fact that, our penalties and things, they wouldn't be considered uncollectible, or they wouldn't be considered not collected until September, which would have been different than prior years.
Yeah, my understanding of the accounts before us today, there isn't a person on the other end of the account to collect the money from, whether it's they moved or their business has gone out of business or they're bankrupt or
Okay,
whatever
yeah.
it might be.
Sorry, so that makes sense. So we're saying these are only those ones, and then those other ones we would still be trying to collect if they weren't collected from the September, because we would have their information one way.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. The other question I had was, at what time in the year did we look at this last? Because was it a full year already?
I believe we brought 19 in. I'd have to go back and look, but it was sometime in 2020. But it was for the year of 2019.
Perfect.
This is for the year of 2020. We're bringing it in early, trying to get on that standard process every year to bring these forward at the same time each year.
So you are confirming what I believed, which is we're doing an even better of making sure we have these adjustments and these accruals done prior to year end, which will just make the year end process and the audit go that much smoother when we have some of these things done and we've done it on our own. It makes your bill smaller in the end, all those other things. They want to make sure we're doing the work. It's not the auditors doing the work. So this is another step in the right direction as far as our finance team doing what they're supposed to be doing, which doing a great job of that. And finally, just general comment, 7,600. I get that last year probably was more of a cleanup year where the amount would have been higher. But even on the grand scheme of things for your uncollectible, these are our write-offs. We're talking about, I don't know, $26 million in sales for utilities and things like that. I don't know what the exact number is. But having only $7,600 of uncollectible on that is a pretty good bad debt ratio for any line of business, which just shows you that our strategies of using the collections accounts on some of them and just what we're doing internally to follow up on them, we're doing a very good job of it. So great job.
Look to the city manager.
Yeah, the only comment I make, I think last year when we did the 70,000, that was 2 years worth of write-offs. I think that was 17 and 18, or 18 and 19, sorry, 18 and 19. So that was 2 years collected or uncollectible, I guess, at the last time we did that.
I do believe the work we've done within the bylaw too to take the ownership of that meter and put it to the property owners has helped that as well. Now you don't have let's call it transient people coming into the community, taking out a water meter and then leaving and having an uncollectible account. So I think that's also had some improvement in how much is uncollectible.
Thank you, Secretary Sting and City Manager. Councilor Dodge.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, I think in part you've answered the part of the question because I noticed that all the accounts are listed as inactive. So these people are no longer buying utilities from the city in any way, shape, or form. Now, I guess from a COVID perspective, in our business survey, we talked about a certain percentage of businesses that, might go under or not reopen or whatever. Are any of these related to, more recent, I guess, closures? Or would you have that part of the information?
I have the biggest one on there is due to a business closure. Now,
Okay.
I don't have any details with regards
No date
to
on it, though.
what business it was or when it closed.
Okay.
Or we could obviously get that confidentially and provide that to council if they wish to see that. My understanding or the information I have is it was a business and they've now closed and the fees are uncollectible.
So if let's say John Doe is one of these individuals on this, or Jane, gender neutral here, is one of these individuals and buys another property, does this carry forward to them? If
Yes,
we don't
so-
collect in time, and so that file would still be there?
Yeah, so if John or Jane Doe comes to the city for another service connection, this will be transferred over to the new bill and it would be required to be full payment prior to getting a new service connection.
And I guess if the large account there of $2,800 is a numbered company, we have the capacity to determine who the primary shareholders of that company is as well.
Yeah, I don't even have a company name in front of me,
Okay.
so I
No,
don't
I
know
guess
if it's a numbered
yeah.
company or if there's detail, but I would assume there's some back check with regards to who they are and it would be flagged.
If you could check, I guess I'm trying to see, I guess, because I think at some points, the cities are being asked, what's the impact of COVID on business and overall impact of the city overall. This is one source of data that we might be able to mine relative to our future going forward as well. And it might be insignificant, but we don't know unless we check. Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. I think it's interesting. I was just doing some quick tabulations. We've got 15 under $10, 1 under $25, and 2 under $100. So over 50% under the $100 mark, which is good to see. And certainly there's a couple larger ones, and I would suspect that Executive Manager Stang, is the $900 one, second one from the top, also by chance in business?
No.
Or is that
Not sure if I can read what's here, but the person is in jail and we could not action collections due to COVID on that.
Okay.
I hope
That
I didn't
would
step out of
explain
line,
why
City
maybe
Clerk.
the bill hasn't been paid. Pretty clear. Okay. Yeah, pretty much from that perspective. So I think as Councillor Thorson alluded to, I do recall last year, and it seemed like not that long ago, but the amount was much higher. So compliments to the team over at the water department as well as finance, because I know it's a joint effort to get those bills collected, and certainly there is going to be a business loss. I think anybody that's been around this table that has been involved in business directly knows there's sometimes bad debt. And this is one of those hazards of the game of doing business. And percentage-wise, I was surprised, Councillor Thorson, you didn't maybe have it drilled right down to a percent, or a point, decimal, but very small. And appreciate that. Any other questions or comments from Council for Administration? Not seeing any. Thank you very much. Moving on to 5.3, ATCO Electric, and I'll look to the City Manager.
Thank you, Worship. For 5.3, ATCO Electric's proposal, streetlights located on city-owned traffic signal facilities. I will ask Don Stang once again to present.
Thank you, City Manager. Before you, we have ATCO Electric's proposal for streetlights located on city-owned traffic lights. Before I get into all the details, this was a proposal that ATCO brought forward to City Administration. We've reviewed it and are bringing it to Council for consideration. The background, there have been many ways that ATCO-owned streetlights have been mounted onto our traffic signal facilities over the years. Those being, some streetlights are fed from a secondary service owned and maintained by ATCO Electric, and billed as an individual light. This practice has been identified as a safety hazard due to having two sources of power through the same facility, as well as some streetlights are fed from the traffic signal service owned and maintained by the City of Lloydminster and billed on an idle rate. The idle rate only captured the cost of the maintenance of the streetlight head with no energy charges, as the streetlight was held on the traffic signal feed. In each of the above, some traffic signal facilities are completely metered and some are on a flat rate. ATCO Electric has recently advised City Administration that Measurement Canada is determining utilities to stop using flat rates. While changing technology, the actual usage is not accurately captured in the flat rate. With the LED conversion over the years, Measurement Canada has determined that the customer is likely being charged more for consumption than what is being used. During a recent audit, ATCO Electric found that some of the streetlights on City of Lloydminster-owned traffic signal facility sites were never metered nor on a flat rate. Therefore, ATCO Electric will be required to properly update locations identified in their audit and have billing entered into their billing system. Once this is complete, the city will see a cost of approximately $2,680 per month for 75 streetlights located on city-owned traffic signal facilities. ATCO Electric has advised that some of these are already being billed, but the sites that are not in billing would need to be added. To be more consistent and to clean up various streetlight scenarios or traffic signal facilities, ATCO Electric is proposing that the City of Lloydminster take over ownership of the streetlight on city-owned traffic signal facilities. The depreciated cost to the City of Lloydminster to do this would cost roughly $30,968 plus GST. By purchasing the streetlight, the City of Lloydminster will not see or will see a reduction in our utility bill by $2,680 per month for ATCO to own and maintain a streetlight located on our traffic signals. Due to the various streetlight service scenarios, some wiring work will be required to get all the existing streetlights fed from the existing traffic signal. Should the city approve ATCO's proposal, there will be an additional cost to the city of Lloydminster. Based on what ATCO Electric could determine from their audit, wiring alterations would be required on 13 sites. Other alterations identified by ATCO Electric for future consideration would include future maintenance. The city, although not maintained, would have the opportunity to hire ATCO or any other contractor to do future maintenance on the streetlights on traffic signal facilities. Alteration to new installation of traffic signals with or without streetlights. So going forward, ATCO Electric would install, own, and maintain the service to a metering point for the new traffic signal facilities. Those would require an upgrade to the existing service due to alterations to the traffic signals, and this cost will be the responsibility of the City of Lloydminster. This would absolve the city of any liability of the service. And any new streetlight on traffic signal facilities would be purchased by the City of Lloydminster from ATCO Electric using ATCO standards in order to maintain consistently streetlight used in the city, as well as help allow for maintenance of the new facilities using standard materials stocked by ATCO. And metering, as noted, Measurement Canada is transforming or transmitting utilities to meter all services. The City of Lloydminster has 7 traffic signal locations that are not metered, and ATCO is recommending to the city to consider installing meters on those. Just a point of clarity, and it wasn't included in this proposal. The cost to run meters to those 7 locations is roughly about $1,500 per site, for a total cost of $10,500 for the 7 sites. In summary, administration will be bringing forward a recommendation to a future council meeting to allow the city to enter into the formal agreement to proceed with the purchase and ownership of the existing 75 streetlights located on traffic signals. It is recommended that the purchase of the ownership of these facilities be completed by the end of 2020 to ensure that no billing corrections are required in 21 if this is deferred. Just to add some more clarity, I talked to ATCO Electric this morning, trying to really get my head wrapped around the proposal on a whole, and it breaks down into basically three areas. So area number 1, the city is to purchase the 75 streetlights from ATCO Electric. That is on the 27 sites where we have traffic signals within the city of Lloydminster. That purchase cost is roughly around $31,000. This will reduce our monthly bill. So by owning those 75 streetlights and taking them out of the ATCO rate base, that will reduce our monthly bill by $2,700 per month. Second part of that is 13 sites will need to have alteration to get the feed onto the load side of the meter. So we have 13 sites where the power is going. There's potentially 2 sources of power through the traffic light, which is obviously a safety issue and not to code. So 13 sites would require getting the load or an alteration to get the load side to the meter. With discussion with ATCO Electric, we're estimating that cost to be around $10,000 for those 13 sites. On top of that, so once that work's done, there will be 38 lights out of the 75 that aren't being accounted for from an energized cost perspective, and the city would then be required to pay an additional $3 to $5 per light per month for those 38 lights. So a total of about $375 additional cost that will be required. And then finally, the third phase of that would be the 7 sites need meter installs. Again, talking to ATCO Electric this morning, the estimate was around 1,000 to 1,500 per site. I'm using 1,500 in this proposal. That comes out to about $10,500 for installing meters on the lights. Once all that work is done, the entire traffic infrastructure, traffic light infrastructure with the lights and everything on top will be connected properly, metered properly, and will be paying based on the energy being used. So the total cost would be around 30,000, 31,000 for the purchase of the lights, another 10,000 for the alteration of the 13 sites, another 10,500 for the meter installation, for a total cost of 52,500. In doing all that work, the city will then save roughly $2,700 in having those lights come out of ATCO's ownership. But we'll also be increasing a cost of $375 per month. So our total savings by doing this work will be $2,325 approximately per month. If you take the $52,000 divided by the $2,300 per month, our payback on making this change is around 23 months. Some unknowns that we don't know, or that could potentially factor that payback period, is the maintenance and replacement of the existing or of the lights that the city is going to take over. So right now the light is owned by ATCO. So if that light goes out or fails, ATCO Electric sends a crew out. They take the light off, they fix it and replace it. We don't ever see a bill for that. It's included in that $2,300 per month. If we own those, we will need to hire a contractor, whether that's ATCO Electric or any other service company that can provide those services. We would need to hire them. We would need to buy a light. We would need to hire them to go up and replace that. So we're unsure of what those maintenance costs are going to be. My understanding of LED lights, they run roughly a 25-year lifespan. So we're kind of basing our knowledge off that. They're quite new, so there isn't a whole bunch of data to understand the full longevity of those, but that's kind of what we're basing it on. And then the actual power consumption of each of the 27 sites, we think we have a good understanding of what that might be, or where they may fall. And it'll come down to, depending on the service size and connection that's required at each of those sites, which would determine what the actual fee would be. So couple things that are unknown that are relatively small in the big scheme of things. The biggest thing is it's going to cost us around $52,000 to purchase these lights, and we're going to see roughly a savings of $2,300 per month in doing so. So I'll pass it. I know it's a lot, Your Worship, and I'm not gonna lie to you. It's a little complicated to understand and go through. I'll do my best to answer any questions. If there's questions I can't that we need to take away for ATCO Electric, we'll record those, and we can definitely answer those for council as we can. So I'll pass it back to you, Your Worship, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Executive Manager Stang. I got Councillor Diachuk, Councillor Buckingham, and Councillor Torres.
Yeah,
So
thanks, Your
start with
Worship.
Councillor Diachuk.
Your summary at the end, I think, kind of helped clarify some things, but I guess I'm just, the one thing is we're going to own the lights. We're paying to buy them, but they'll replace the lights, they'll maintain them. So really we own them, but they maintain them and replace the bulbs and all the other pieces. Is that accurate?
No, we'll own them and maintain and replace them. And then it'll be our discretion whether we hire ATCO to do that work or we hire somebody else to do that work.
Okay.
But either way, it will be an expense to the city.
Okay. Because I was trying to see what savings there was in there. So it's cheaper for us to own it and maintain it than pay the current rates we are with them, having them own it.
Yeah, the theory around that is it's not going to cost us $2,300 per month to maintain those streetlights over the next 25 years. That's the theory. So we're reducing a fee by taking those lights on. Plus we're improving safety and everything else by wiring them in properly. the cost to maintain it should be relatively minimal in the big scheme of things over the next 25 years.
So any idea what those LED lights cost to replace?
They're about $500 a pop. My
And
understanding, and it could be corrected.
But our power bill will remain roughly the same, because what I'm hearing though, some of the lights are metered and some are not, so that's still to be borne out as to.
Yeah, that's where the complication, and maybe Dion, if he can step in and try and help. My understanding is, so the way it works is we pay a flat rate or a rate for the street light. And that rate includes the cost of the street light plus any future maintenance, replacements, everything else for ATCO Electric to maintain that for eternity. What we would be doing in purchasing these is we would take that out of their billing account, and then we would just be paying the energy on those lights. So that flat rate was energy plus maintenance plus. Yeah. And by taking that out, we reduce our monthly bill by about $2,300, and we would just be paying energy, which, you know, ATCO is telling me is around that $3 to $5 per light per month.
So why didn't we do this to start with?
It's the way it's always been, Councillor. Right. Streetlights have always been paid by owned and maintained by ATCO Electric. Okay. For many years. Actually, it's probably the first question I asked Perry, why would we do this? Perry, or ATCO Electric, I should say, ATCO Electric does say this is a benefit to the city. And the reason they're doing it is from a safety and a consistency perspective. So having wires throughout the traffic signal that are ours, it's basically our infrastructure, and they own the light at the top of it. In order to get some consistency, safety, one source of feed of power to those facilities, this is the best way they feel that it works. It is at a disadvantage because at the end of the day, ATCO Electric saying we will maintain it if you want us to, or we would continue to provide you that service, and you would pay for that service, but we don't essentially have to hire ATCO to do. There are other companies, local companies that provide that kind of service. So we would then make a choice of who we would have come in, maintain, or replace that light. But at the end of the day, the cost would be ours. So we're balancing those potential one-time costs versus a $2,300 payment month over month over month.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Just in with your further explanation today, I'd already figured out some things with the 16-month payback as opposed to 11, as it says in the document today. And now it's a 23-month payback once you've got your further information.
Yeah, my apology for that, Councillor. The 11 was based on the 32 divided by the. You have to add the other 10 in plus now. You know what we would do. We wouldn't want to do this in a piecemeal. If we're gonna go forth and bring everything up to standard, our administration's recommendation would be to do it all, which is purchase the 32, do the alterations, and meter everything and be done.
Yes,
so that's a different payback than when we had wrote the IR 3 weeks ago. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, no worries. I was hoping that I could ask that the IR be updated when it comes back to council for transparency and everything else, that it's exactly what it says it is, not 11 months, but 23.
Absolutely.
Coming forward when it actually comes for decision.
Yeah.
Now that you have the further information.
Yeah, absolutely. We're already in the process of re-rating that this morning. So
the second thing I was going to ask about, and you kind of touched on it answering Councillor Diachuk's question, is that maintenance side of things. When you say there's great local companies that can do the work, is it something that but you also said it's not that they're burning out all the time. It's not a huge amount of things. Is that something that you would RFP out to have a standing agreement, to have something, because ATCO's pretty quick about being able to fix that kind of thing if something happens? Is that something that we would have a standing agreement with someone to work towards, to make sure that we get those things dealt with in a timely fashion, as opposed to calling somebody Friday and saying at 3 o'clock, say, lights out?
Yeah, it's definitely something administration can look at and see if that is the best. I think for the first part of this, I would want to see what our actual issues are, because I don't foresee them being many. We drive around the city every day. I don't think ATCO's out there replacing lights on a constant basis. So once they're in and they're all been installed for roughly a year now. So the ones that were glitchy or defective have been kind of worked out of the system already. So I see these being very minimal maintenance year over year. But once we start seeing a maintenance cost, I think that's a great idea. It's something we've already talked about internally from administration perspective. Is that a standing offer? Is it an RFP? Is it go out and get 2 or 3 quotes and how do we move forward with that? But I know there's a couple local companies that can do that work. So we'll look at that a little bit deeper as we move forward.
Yeah, as long as you're cutting down the administrative work on it, if you have somebody set up to do it whenever it happens, right? As opposed to getting those couple quotes or having to take the time to reach out or whatever the case may be. I mean, obviously the replacement or fix of one of these is going to be well under the threshold of city manager and yourself to actually deal with those things. But and I don't want to throw ATCO under the bus. It's not that we don't think that ATCO does a great job for us, but I am excited about the prospect of these things being able to be done locally, which is great.
Yep.
Some of that would have to, sorry, your worship, would be somebody's got to stock the bulbs, somebody's got to stock the heads. Maybe, there's some of those things we've got to take into consideration as well, that if you match the infrastructure that ATCO's already got in place, they've got the bulbs, they've got, so those are a number of things we've got to take into consideration as well. So I think that was some of our discussion that we had previously.
Thank you.
And I would think we would probably run our maintenance program around the same. I think within our franchise agreement, they have X number of days. I'm not sure if it's 5 days to replace a burnt out light or 7 days. I can't remember what it is, but we would probably try and follow those timelines as well.
And that's not parts or products that we would buy necessarily. Could we buy and have in stock and have that company on standby to replace what we already have purchased? Because maybe there's some efficiencies to be found in group buying and procurement on that side of stuff too, if the city actually had those things in stock as opposed to having the company that you're contracting to put them up with keep them in stock.
Yeah, no, great comments and great ideas and things that absolutely administration needs to determine what makes the most sense when it comes down to actually maintaining these. As far as administration perspective, this will be on transportation's to-do list to figure out how we best move forward with that maintenance and determine whether we keep in stock or if we can purchase locally or on a relatively short timeline to get that equipment out here to have it replaced. So definitely things we'll be looking at as we move forward.
Thank you, Executive Manager Stein. Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to be clear, we're only talking about the fixture on there. It's not the poles and everything else included on that.
We already own the poles and infrastructure. Yeah, it's just the actual streetlight head.
And those were all changed within the last year or two, right?
They were all changed from high pressure sodium to LED within the last 12 to 16 months ish.
Yeah, I guess that if that had not been the case, I'd be concerned that we were buying, like a Xerox type of situation where you get a really good, or you get your lease and then you get the bargain purchase offer at the end, and then you have nothing but maintenance costs filling your life afterwards. But if these are relatively new, then I don't think that we have that concern. So for that reason, I think that we could actually see the savings when you go from, just being kind of a leaser or whatever we would have been considered before to now owning it. If there's not projected to be significant maintenance costs, then I think that, we could take advantage of doing it, clean up the liability, clean up the power source issues. And it sounds like a pretty good idea from what I've heard. One of the other questions I was just going to ask is, with moving of the power sources around and things like that, is there going to be any effect on our traffic signals as far as all the upgrades to hardware and that system that we just did?
No, not that I'm aware of. It shouldn't have any impact there. It's essentially, my understanding is simple, potentially as taking a wire and sticking it into a breaker properly. So it won't have any impact on what we're doing from a traffic perspective.
And I guess the only other thing is whether or not we consider, you mentioned that the LED lights should have a 25-year lifespan, but if they were all roughly installed around the same time, you're going to get problems all around the same time as well. So it may be worth our time to allocate money over time, knowing that they're probably all going to relatively go out at the same time. Kind of like when you buy a new house and then 5 years later, every bulb seems to go out.
Yeah, just talking to city manager, yes, that's something we can look at as well. We would own just these 75. The rest of the streetlights across the city obviously aren't ours, and that's ATCO's responsibility to replace and maintain those. And actually, it was a question we asked, is ATCO going to come to the city for us to buy all the streetlights back? And it was a pretty clear no. That's the only reason they've come to us with this regard, is because we own the infrastructure they're mounted on, where the rest, all the other traffic lights within the city are owned Davits by ATCO.
I certainly appreciate the one thing as you're discussing and bringing facts forward, Section Manager Stang, was the safety factor that we could have because of the power sources. We could have someone fixing the signals and think that they've disconnected the right wire, in turn have a safety issue. So there's something to be said about one single feed into every post and to those things. I think it's very important when we deal with those kind of things. From the perspective, we would end up, and there was different questions, and it's just one for thought, is would we end up in a sole source contract with ATCO then to buy materials from them, as they indicated that we're going with the standardization, and it's kind of been alluded to already. From this perspective, are we actually getting some free power right now as the way this, because in the three parts, I take it there's one area there that they kind of identified that we're not even being billed for because there's no meter and it's not in the factor.
Yeah, I don't know the number of sites, but I believe it was seven. Seven.
That's
pops
what I
into my-
had here. Was I just
seven sites currently we haven't been billed for a very long time, and that's kind of what drove this coming forward, is they were going to have to increase our bill to account for those
so that would be
unbilled
erased, or that would just be, we'd be signing off and saying this is from this point on, and we wouldn't get a retro bill saying
that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate you bringing up the new facts too, because there is additional costs, and there's more than just simply what, as you said in the first IR. So, I look back at it, and it's a 23-month, give or take 24-month payback, which isn't pretty bad, isn't too bad for the investment. It is $52,000. You did specify that they'd like to get this done in 2020. So, look to yourself or the city manager or CFO. Would this then come from reserves, because this was an unbudgeted item in 2020? Okay. So that would come forward as well as part of the motion to, I would imagine, that this money would be taken from reserves of whatever transportation. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Fagnan.
Yes, I think it's just a really good idea to have all that efficiency, throughout that. I'm assuming it sounded like there was some that were just being a flat rate as well. And Measures Canada was finding that those flat rates were usually in favor of the utility company, not the municipality. So I think that this is good to keep it all consistent and nice, neat, and clean.
Good point, Councillor Fagnan. I think that it wasn't driven by ourselves or ATCO. It was driven by Measurement Canada doing their job, and appreciate that they're looking after our interests as well. So certainly I think it's a positive step. Maybe we'll involve Councillor Diachuk in the negotiations with ATCO directly, and he can carry the load, but that's all good. That's a little inside, but we'll leave it at that. Moving on to item number 6.1.
Just to speak, we also did see some savings in some other areas too. The multiplier rate changed for all the LED conversion lights. So we did see that earlier. We had an analysis done on it. We could be saving upwards of $2,000 a month on streetlights from the LED conversion too. So it's not all paying more too. We have seen some savings over, I think that started back in September that we received that. So there are some savings opportunities as well with some of these audits that are going on and
initiatives.
great changes.
And depending, depending on the amount of energy used at each of the lights, we may be able to go from what they call a D21 meter to a D22 meter, which will essentially be cheaper for the city to utilize the power out of. So,
And that would be reviewed on a yearly basis or whatever agreed to?
yeah, typically gets reviewed. So if you go over what your anticipated consumption is, then it gets reviewed, and they'd come back and say, now you're a D21. That's how I understand it, but I could definitely look into that process.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else on that item? With that, it moves on to 6, and I will excuse myself and turn it over, move the chair over to the Deputy Mayor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Moving on to agenda item number 6 under governance and priority matters. 6.1, policy number 120-03, the Council Remuneration Policy. City Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. To present 6.1, policy number 120-03, Council Remuneration, I'll ask Dan Hobson to come forward and present.
Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor. Afternoon, Council. Before you today, administration is proposing a minor amendment to the council remuneration policy. In accordance with city policies in October 2019, administration sought a committee made up of residents to review the former council remuneration policy. As part of that review, the ultimate recommendation was to keep council remuneration at its current rate. When city administration brought forward the new policy, we had aligned the mayor's vehicle allowance with an internal directive. Ultimately, what we had done was reduced the mayor's remuneration by around $5,000 annually. So we're bringing forward a proposal to correct that and bring back what it was previously, which is $500 a month, and maintain the status quo. If there's any questions, be happy to answer them. Or if there's any other suggestions.
Thank you, Dan. Questions? Councillor Diacek.
Yeah, not a question, but thank you for bringing that forward. And obviously we missed it, but on just a little thing on 6.4, you currently say without limiting the foregoing, per diem shall not be paid following. It should be paid for the following. So just add FOR in there.
Sorry, that per diem shall not be paid for the following. So what part of regular council meeting?
No,
so
stop. So you just need the word FOR for between.
Oh, thank you.
You inserted 4 in there, right? So just need to add 4 in there. Just a small little correction for when we vote on it.
We'll bring that forward as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Torson.
Yes, thank you, your deputy worship. No, just generally, I don't think anyone's intention was to give the mayor a $5,000 pay cut when this was done last time around. I don't believe that was the committee that recommended these salaries intentions either. So just an oversight, and thank you for bringing it forward.
Good. Any other questions of council? Yep. Thank you, Dan. Somebody can allow the mayor back in now. We talked about not letting him back in, but
All right, chair is back to me. Thank you very much. Moving on to 6.2, governance document repeal. City Manager.
Thank you, Worship. For 6.2, governance document repeal, I'll ask Dan to present once again.
Thank you, City Manager. Before you today, Council, is another housekeeping item. We have brought forward some policies and some bylaws that administration feels have served their purpose and can be repealed. at a quick overview from the group RRSP plan and the provisions of part-time benefits, provision of part-time employees, sorry. We have that covered at a high level through collective agreements as well as internal protocols through the HR department. And they're also bringing forward a directive for the out-of-scope RRSP plan to manage that. Council remuneration policy. So this was the original policy as we just discussed. So this policy needs to be repealed as the current one we just reviewed was made active following the election. And additionally, the Allied Art Council bylaw, as well as all the senior citizens housing bylaws, are out of date, and none of those bylaws are used to provide those organizations with any authority. The senior housing bylaws, the current arrangement has their authority governed through ministerial orders, and the Allied Art Council does not utilize the current bylaw for their organization. If there's any questions, I'll also be happy to address them.
Thank you, Dan. Questions or comments from council? Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't see any issues with the repeal of all these items. I just had more of a general question. When we did our George Cuff report, there was X number of stale dated policies and bylaws that were mentioned in there. I just wonder if you could get that number back to council at some point to see where we're at with that list. Just as a high level number, what percentage or how many have we dealt with? That's all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Fagnan.
It's just nice to see these all being cleaned up one at a time, and someday we'll get there. It'll be all nice, but keep up the good work and get at those.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? And Dan, as you had alluded to, so just anyone that might have read through the package and not gone fully through each one of these, especially around senior citizens housing, that was dealt with by the province, and in essence their law trumps the bylaw that was created back in 1959.
Correct.
Okay, and that follows through with 83 and 85. I think that was the one that jumped out at me from the perspective, and as well the Allied Arts one you said is no longer applicable. But
the organization exists, but the organization doesn't exist with any authority given to or from this bylaw. So with the repeal of this bylaw, that organization would still exist today.
Absolutely.
Or sorry, exist as they
exist as it is, but right, with no perspective. Okay. Any other comments or questions of Dan? Again, compliments to you for the housekeeping, Dan. I think there's some history there.
Yeah.
But as we know, history is important to keep track, but sometimes we have to move on, and this is a good point to move on. So, any other comments? Last call.
I will ask
Councillor Whiting.
one question. It's something even back in my term that there was lots of bylaws that got repealed, and kind of that house cleaning thing that we talked about. Is it just a factor of time passing and things getting put on the back burner or into a file folder and getting forgotten about, or do we now have better processes moving forward to track this and identify when something is now out of date and won't ever get forgotten again? Or again, is it just this might happen with some of the some of the bylaws that we pass 30 years from now, somebody going, well, we got to repeal that bylaw from council back in 2020.
Yeah. So I think a couple of things there is we now have a governance review policy and a schedule. So that's kind of what's driving everything moving forward is every time a policy is passed or all of our current existing policies and bylaws, they all have a review date. So we've split that up. We have quite a few to go through. So we will be bringing forward our Q4 2020 report sometime in 2021. And then that'll also lay out what we'll be reviewing in 2021. That being said, a new policy can come about at council's direction or at any time for a review, but it is a matter of us having better processes now in place to review policies and find the outdated ones.
Got the city clerk.
I think the other piece of that, councillor, is that we actually have a position that is focused on that. So we have somebody maintaining those suites. The policy is there, and now we have somebody actually maintaining and fulfilling the requirements of that policy.
Thank you. Very good. All right. Last call. Any questions or comments? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Dan. Appreciate
you.
the update. Moving on to 6.3, City Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 6.3, Land Use Bylaw number 5-2016 text amendment, residential uses, I will ask Anthony Andre to come forward and present.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Good afternoon, Anthony.
The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with information pertaining to a proposed amendment to the text of the Land Use Bylaw number 5-2016, which seeks to expand on the number of housing types within most residential districts. The Land Use Bylaw regulates the use and development of land and is guided by policies within the MDP. The MDP encourages a broad and varied housing distribution to meet the needs of all demographics and encourage the gradual infill of vacant and larger lots. However, the distribution of residential uses within each district is rather limited. While this offers a high level of predictability for future development to property owners, it also results in a low level of flexibility for builders and developers. This inflexibility limits the potential for infill development, important for economic, environmental, and social sustainability. The 5 main residential districts, which are R1 through R5, represent a spectrum of density from R1 being low and R5 being high density. Currently, each district accommodates only 1 or 2 housing types. Where a developer wishes to construct a residential use that is not listed within a given district, they must make an application to council to redistrict the property, a process that is both costly and time-consuming. Frequent redistricting may also erode the predictability that a land use bylaw is meant to provide to residents and property owners. Redistricting is currently necessary even when the proposed use deviates slightly from those listed, whether the proposed density is higher or lower. For example, if a semi-detached dwelling, 2 units side by side, being proposed in an R3 district, or is proposed in an R3 district, an amendment would be required to district to an R2, despite the fact that R3 accommodates row housing. When the land use bylaw was adopted in 2016, the district map remained relatively unchanged from that of the outgoing zoning bylaw, but the district tables restricted the number of residential uses. The result is that some areas of the city, which were previously upzoned to allow higher density infill opportunities, are now restricted to this form of development. It also means that many developments which were allowed when constructed suddenly became legally non-conforming. These restrictions have reportedly prevented the sale and redevelopment of aging single detached dwellings because specific districting cannot accommodate the developer's infill project. Expanding the number of residential uses in the districts, as shown in Table 1, increases flexibility for development, allows developers to better adjust to changes in market conditions, and creates opportunities for infill development more broadly, as opposed to mandating it in concentrated areas. As part of this review, the distribution of residential land uses within districts was compared to 14 municipalities across Alberta and Saskatchewan. While the number of residential districts and the range of uses varies substantially between the comparison group, it was determined that the City of Lloydminster's current land use bylaw is amongst the most restrictive. The additions presented represent a relatively standard approach and are comparable to the regulations previously employed under the zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I'll look to council for questions or comments. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have lots of questions about this, and partially because I've never, taken a deep dive into planning. I mean, it's kind of in the weeds for council to understand it, 210%. So I do not claim to be an expert by any stretch of the imagination. However, what concerns me in this is the broad change that I believe is being proposed in this. So you look at the secondary map, I believe, that was attached to this. Yeah. So this would change in broad strokes different areas of the city. under one amendment to this bylaw, correct?
This doesn't change the map at all.
No.
It just, it affects most districts, yes.
Yes. So my concern, and we've discussed this in the past under different amendments we've done. My concern is an area of town where there's a $500,000 home, for example, that's just been built. Technically, this could then make it so a duplex or something like that could be built right next to that without having to have any special authority to do so. For me, in districts where you know there's been a fire that's been developed for a long time, there are things we can change in there. But if you're buying a property in a district specifically because it's this district or that kind of a district, you probably don't want to have something that doesn't conform with what's the rest of the neighborhood has from a landowner's perspective, right? For resale value of your home, for that type of thing. So I just would like a better understanding of if this goes forward, what changes, what restrictions are really changing here that could affect that kind of thing. Because like I say, the previous counselor had drilled into me over and over again, right? I bought a house in this area with this residential designation. Now you're changing it. You can't do that because you're now affecting parking. You're now affecting my property, that type of thing. So I just want a clear understanding of that before I'd be comfortable moving forward.
Right, and I think that that's the main, the main concern that anyone would have with this amendment. However, I think it's important to note that we have reviewed other municipalities. We've ensured that this is consistent with best practices, and that the uses that we're proposing are appropriate for those districts.
I kind of do, Councillor,
Yeah, go ahead.
if I may, at this point. Anthony, it's in the comments under the background, you talk about redevelopment. So I think the concern that I hear Councillor Buckingham, and I understand that concern, I believe, is that if I had a new lot in a new area of the community, this could be a very big concern. If I'm in an existing developed area where there has been development, but all of a sudden the house is torn down due to the health conditions or the condition of the house, fire, and I want to do something different, I can see where that applies. But the challenge is, how do we differentiate where somebody says, oh, I bought a lot and things have turned in the economy in Westminster, and now I think I'm going to put a duplex there rather than because I'm going to try and get it to move because there's an interest. But you're now putting that in an R1, which has been set up as a community as R1. Just like you were going into the community originally in a redevelopment that was an R1, but it would fit that neighborhood because of the change that's already happened. So how do we distinguish between new development and development?
Well, certainly I think that the example that keeps coming up here is the duplex, the 2-unit dwelling in an R1 district, which was some of the concerns that were raised in the referral as well. Again, this is actually a fairly common practice to allow this, and in fact, the city allowed this up until 2016 under the previous zoning bylaw, and to my knowledge, we never had any concerns with that. One of the main developers in the city had several 2-unit dwellings constructed across the street from his house. So I'm not sure why that's something that is causing a lot of concern.
Okay, I don't, like I say, I'm just trying to understand new versus redevelopment. That would be the one piece to it. That's taking into account just different examples, but from that perspective, I could see it. And I guess that's that question, because we see it throughout the community. If you drive across our city, we can tell at different times the economic levels, progression at the time, and then all of a sudden the style of houses change. And you can see it in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And it was the flow of the economy, right? The economy drove certain things and expansion. And I guess I'm all for having as well planned out neighborhoods as we can and things like that. And if we have some R1, R2, R3, R4 would be ideal, in my opinion, based on much larger cities, or you look at what's happened in Detroit, Toronto, and things like that, even Regina and Saskatoon, where the inner city, or not necessarily the inner city, the neighborhood didn't keep up with the change of pace. People lived in those houses all their time, and they didn't have a chance to invite new people into the neighborhood. People passed, and they didn't decide to choose that neighborhood. So just a part of that planning piece is all I'm looking at from my perspective. I'll move to Councillor Torreson's question, and maybe we'll come back.
Can I have just my follow-up to that
Certainly.
before we get there, if that's allowable?
I would think he's yes, he's cooperative.
My concern is, I think when you put out the responses to developers, they're going to go absolutely, right? Because this is going to give them the opportunity to build multiple different things that they might not have been able to build under the current bylaw, right? So they're going to go, yep, we're all for this. But my concern is that what our job is as council is to safeguard people's property and planning and doing all these things for them. That's our job. So I'm not making money on the fact that a developer does or doesn't build a duplex or a house or multi-story building or whatever the case may be. So I think we need to look at this from the perspective of what's there now and not do a broad strokes change to this for that reason. That is in our purview to make sure that we're doing the right things for people and their neighborhoods and where they've invested. I think that's what people expect of council, is to make sure that we're safeguarding those decisions and those investments they've made around it. So just my thoughts on the process.
Thank you. Councillor Torres.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think Councillor Buckingham, his follow-up was kind of what my thoughts were, unless I'm misunderstanding this, which is possible. But to me, it almost looks as though council would be abdicating their responsibility on these items and passing them along to the planners that aren't necessarily as easily to hold accountable in this process. So if you are not a fan of something going on in your neighborhood, do you still have all the same abilities? Do you still have the ability to come to a council meeting and do a public presentation when there's potential zoning changes? Or is it going to be carte blanche? I can develop, or so long as I put my application in, I can change the zoning to whatever I want? Or does council still have the responsibility to approve those zoning changes and ensure that we've heard from all the residents and that we've taken into consideration those items? So I don't know if I'm misunderstanding what this is saying, but to me that's what it's saying, is that there's kind of, rather than having any controls, we're saying it's much cheaper if we take all the controls off of this and just allow those decisions to be made at a lower level. But the challenge is that takes away the accountability that the residents within our community have. Planners would have the ability to change the zoning anywhere between R1 and R5?
We wouldn't be changing the zoning, but it does allow more uses within each district to be built there without having to come to council. So there would be more of an emphasis on the administration going through the discretionary use process and that sort of thing.
Part of what you said was still going through the discretionary use process, so still it is opportunity for public feedback and still coming to council for final approval if we're talking about discretionary use.
Discretionary use doesn't require council approval, but it's something we've talked about from an administration perspective, that we would look at the land use bylaw and potentially change the discretionary to a council approval only versus a development officer / planner approval for that discretionary use. Because I fully understand what council's concerns are. You don't want to allow R1 in an R4 or an R4 in an R1, and we need to follow planning practices. But our current bylaw is got, I don't know the number, Anthony, in the hundreds of properties that are in contravention of our land use bylaw just based on the use that's already in place. We have another example of a property where they need to rebuild on an existing lot, but that existing lot's in an R4 zoning and doesn't permit R1 to be rebuilt, yet 90% of the buildings around it are R1. So it part of the complication was what changed when the land use bylaw was rewritten in 2016, and the complications of what that caused and what it permitted, or what the city permitted prior to that change. And now we're in a situation where we're trying to kind of get back to where we were prior to that, but also understand that council has some concerns with how those will be reviewed and how those will be approved. And it's something we will definitely be taken into consideration with a potential text amendment to the land use bylaw where discretionary becomes a council direction.
So if I can sort of summarize exactly what you've said, unless Councillor Thorson, did you have a question to go back on?
At the end of the day, in our history in doing this is when those have come to council, and maybe it's the fact that it takes more time and costs more money, I'm not sure that that's the concern, but when they have come to council and it's straightforward and it's, you know, the uses around it are X, then council still held accountable and able to make that decision. My concern is not with Andre, it's with who the next planner is. Maybe he or she is a real cowboy and they'll say, yep, put it wherever. And then where's that accountability that the public has and what they would expect in the planning process, and kind of what, to me, our legislative responsibilities are in this process. So I can appreciate what you're saying is the suggestion. I think this one will need a little bit of clarifying in those areas for me to have the comfort level of bringing it to a council meeting.
And I would echo those same words, Councillor. I think that, you know, I appreciate Anthony very much in the report. You looked at other communities across Alberta, Saskatchewan. We are some of the most restrictive, which is not, it can be good, but it can be also, it can dampen or it's definitely put off some other things that are beneficial. I see this as a red tape reduction. It's just, I think we need to do a little massaging how we get to that point, where those checks and balances are, because as Councillor Buckingham alluded to, it's very important that someone that has invested believes they're going to be in an R1. And we have had, the previous council, in the last 4 years, we did deal with literally developments, but we felt they meet as the developer brought them forward. But this is going to be a little challenging one-on-one, but I believe.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment, Your Worship. Obviously, if we would take a text amendment to the land use bylaw where anything discretionary needs council approval, you're potentially adding what we consider red tape into a lot of, maybe more standard ways of, or standard processes where we don't really need council approval to move forward on a discretionary use. So we got to be really careful with what we're asking and how we move forward with this. And maybe that's something administration can look into a lot deeper and determine how and what that wording might look like. And maybe it is tied directly to this specific piece. I don't know if that's a possible thing, but I think we hear council's concern, obviously, and we'll take that into consideration and bring some options forward, council.
Thank you. I got Councillor Whiting, and I'll get to Councillor Buckingham.
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship. I think one of the things that just was challenging, and I appreciate the chart having everything in one piece there, but it overlaid about 3 different pieces of information in one thing, and just trying to get my brain to wrap around what's proposed, what's existing, and then permitted versus discretionary versus all the, and so there is a lot of information in that one chart. I would suggest separating out what other municipalities are doing, what's current and what's proposed in those 3 different charts. And I do think that there's 2 things happening. We're becoming less restrictive, in which, are we, one of the things I think that the land use bylaw tried to strive for is both a little bit of everything from density, bringing in density into existing areas to try, because we were expanding so quickly at a point in time that we wanted to ensure that we had the appropriate density into future neighborhoods, as well as some of the existing ones too, I believe. And so it's a lot of information in one little piece here to, when I look at, as an example, a single detached dwelling can now be in R1, 2, 3, 4, or R5, the asterisk is in R5, but it is proposed as discretionary up to R4. And I did, so, yeah, go ahead, Don. Yep.
Sorry, turn my mic
No
on.
problem.
Yeah, and I'll give you a prime example of when that actually takes place. So when we introduced the land use bylaw in 2016, they had anticipated or what's the word I'm looking for? Looked forward to having some R4 planning within an area relatively close to the downtown district. So it was our zoned R4, but within that development, so that was future aspirational planning is what I was trying to come up with there. So within that block, there is some multifamily properties in there, but a majority of them are still considered R1, or they're single family detached housing. Fire occurs, house burns down. Now that landowner doesn't have the ability to build an R1 because R1's not allowable in an R4 under our current land use bylaw. So in order to deal with that, you can have the zoning, which is what administration is recommending, where you're allowing R1 in these other zones where it's applicable, where it fits into the neighborhood, where it's been reviewed and approved, and all those things happen, or you keep it where it is as really restrictive, and you have each one of those come back into council as a rezone and an opportunity through that process. So there are advantages to both sides of that equation, and I guess it comes down to council's comfortability that the planning team is keeping the best interest of the neighborhoods in check as we look and approve each of the applications that come forward. And we do have professionals on staff that are well versed in making sure that neighborhoods are conclusive and inclusive, and that we don't do something that goes against what standard planning policy would allow us.
Could there be three? And I think the fear, like I heard from Councillor Torsen, and myself included too, is discretionary doesn't come back to council specifically, and can be a discretionary use can be made available through planning and development. And I think that is we have faith that they're not going to put something in a something that doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But is there such a thing in other municipalities, a 3-level of permitted, discretionary, and then through to council for approval, as an example? Because I would see something like in that situation that you're talking about, I absolutely agree. A fire hit them, a single detached should be what goes back up there. I have no problems in that one whatsoever, right? That makes sense. We're not at the point where that area is fully infilled yet. I would, but I do want to encourage infill in those already existing neighborhoods. So how do I balance the infill encouragement and higher density versus, but I also don't want every time that this happens, a developer comes through, says, you know what, I don't feel like putting up a single detached in this neighborhood. I only want to put up I do want to put up only a single detached and not have to go through with a semi-detached or something like that, where that's what we've been hoping and encouraging. And that's the density side of it. Then there's the other side of it, which is the hey, these homeowners have built and put up nice R1 single detached, beautiful homes, and now we're looking to add a semi-detached and a duplex right next door if it was deemed appropriate by the development officer. So just trying to balance all that out. And how do we have the right information here to make that decision, I guess.
Yeah, I think go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna, maybe Anthony can speak to how other municipalities have taken that, but we fully understand council's concern, and we'll take it away and hopefully come back with some recommendations that maybe we can handle this.
Okay, I've got Councillor Buckingham and then Councillor Dodczyk.
Thank you, Worship. Believe me, I'm 100% for red tape reduction and making things smooth and making us as a city open for business and making things go as quickly and easily as we possibly can, but keeping it done right. So I don't want to be misconstrued that way. I'm for that. My question becomes, we talked about Executive Manager Stang, you said there was 100 non-conforming residences or business or whatever the case may be with outstanding now, right? Can those things, can those particular ones, can they be grandfathered into what's there to make them conforming, to get them off that non-conforming list? Then my second question, which is kind of the same in the same vein, is when you have the place where the gentleman has a fire and he loses his home, and that can come back to council, and without changing this broad strokes, we can make the decision on that one so he can move forward. Those are my two questions.
Sure. Yeah, when it comes to the legal non-conforming uses, we actually estimate that there's hundreds of them in the city. And what that means is houses, townhouses, row houses, whatever they happen to be right now, if they were to burn down or become destroyed, they cannot be rebuilt. There's dozens of single-family homes in $500,000 plus neighborhoods that would need to be reconstructed as duplexes currently. The reason for that is that under the old zoning bylaw, you used to have the choice as to build a single detached property or a duplex in some of those areas, and now they are simply 4 duplexes where a house was built. Your second question, more along the lines of when one burns down, can we make it so that we can approve those? More or less, that's what we're trying to do with this. Legal non-conforming uses they're governed by the MGA. So essentially they're allowed until such time as 75% of the value of that construction is destroyed, in which case the use must cease and any new development must conform to the land use bylaw, which is effectively what we're trying to do here.
On the case of a house burning down somewhere, fortunately, and we never plan for those things and we don't want them to be a relevant factor. But in the one-offs, we could do that. That falls under our purview to be able to make that decision.
We cannot right now. We have a situation where somebody's house has burned down. He's been waiting almost 2 years for some kind of an amendment to allow him to rebuild.
So I guess that's what I'm asking, right? Just to get my head around that council can grant that amendment to that particular site without broad stroke changing the whole issue.
They could come in and make an application to amend their site specifically to do a map amendment on a case-by-case basis. I would argue that that's taking away from the predictability that the zoning adds. If people can just come in whenever they want to change the zoning and amend the zoning, you're to some extent defeating the purpose of having it.
Yeah, I get that's a tough position to put you guys and everybody in,
right.
But at the same time, we have the purview to make that happen, and we dealt with it with a previous one in this kind of same idea. It wasn't a burn down; it was a new build, and it wasn't zoned properly. But we looked around it, and everything around it fit what they wanted to do.
Right.
So we did it. So that's the same thing I'm asking here. We could do that.
We could do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to speak to that, Councillor Buckingham, yes, we can. Like obviously that individual property owner can come in and ask for a land use zoning amendment to change it from R4 back to an R1, but then it goes against our aspirational planning for that neighborhood. And when there is a developer or somebody interested in doing the R4 type higher density in that downtown area, now you got a property that isn't fit to the R4 zoning, and therefore would need some rezoning in order to meet the aspirational zoning that we have in that area. So the answer is yes, but that doesn't come without its complications and issues that come with that. The other thing I just want to note, like we're not we're not proposing to build an R4 and an R1. The only way an R1 would be permitted in an R4 is in the example we gave where it was an aspirational zoned area that has an R1 that was destroyed and needs to be rebuilt as an R1 because the area is not ready to be redeveloped into a multifamily area. Really what we're adding to an R1, which is 90% of the residential properties within, obviously South Highway 16, we're only adding semi-detached, which essentially looks like correct me if I'm wrong here, Anthony, but is an R1 with top floor and a bottom floor, 2 suites. So it's not like we're promoting or asking for high density to be built in an R1 zone adjacent to, high priced R1 homes. It all fits within the neighborhood. So take into consideration what we're asking. We're not asking to put high density in R1 area. We're asking to be able to do an R1 in a higher density area that was set out through aspirational planning in order to meet the needs of our current issues that are arising, which is the 100+ properties that are non-conforming, plus in this one case where an individual had his property destroyed by fire and can't rebuild and can't get insurance to rebuild on another property. They need to rebuild this R1. So it's 2 options. We either amend our land use bylaw to permit it, or that individual has to come in and apply for a rezone for their specific property. So I think what Anthony and the planning department are bringing forward is a comprehensive plan that takes all that into consideration, that allows us to make those decisions as the planning department sees fit, without being too restrictive to be rigid and have everything have to come to council for approval. And again, the discretionary is something we've talked about as administration, and probably some more conversation needs to happen. But it's definitely something we can discuss further and bring it back to council for discussion.
From the planning side of things, would you say aspirational planning is more towards bare land development versus current rezoning or restructuring or changes to older existing developments?
Well, I think you coined the term, but yeah, it's more, I would say it's been used more for infill upzoning.
Yeah, I have less concern with an older developed neighborhood having to have something like that go on than I do with a non or bare land development in a new and expanding neighborhood, for sure.
And that's where most of the aspirational planning is. Like, for example, on the perimeter of the downtown core, for example, or even in the downtown core, the new DARP contemplates aspirational planning of the downtown. We have aspirational planning just on the outside of that, where we're looking to bring more people into the downtown core. So obviously aspirational to have higher density properties within close proximity to downtown. It comes less likely that you have aspirational planning in your browns or your greenfield developments, but you still have areas where you had a developer, for example, who had a project and ended up building a higher density within an R1 that's now going against the land use bylaw. Those are the types that we're counting as the hundreds, where some of these are built where maybe they I don't want to say where maybe they shouldn't have been, but didn't totally fit in that zoning bylaw. So what we're contemplating is to be more comprehensive to the properties and how they've been established, to give us some flexibility to allow these types of properties to be in place without trying to hinder or risk the R1s that are there to have a high density apartment building or condo or whatever it might be next door to it. R1 zoning does permit right now for a duplex. That's within our discretionary use right now. So you're not really changing much by adding single detached to an R1 development or an R1 zoning, if that makes sense. That we're not contemplating a major change to the R1. Actually, the major change is to the R2s, 3s, and 4s.
Councillor Diachak.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. So two things. One is, I guess as I'm looking at the example that, you used in here, the building burning down and it sounds like the insurance is contingent on rebuilding the building is the way the insurance plan would seem to be. And so in essence, because of the zoning, we're not permitting the building to be rebuilt. And the owner is stuck now holding the bag because his insurance plan is locked up and he can't get his building that he had invested, whatever he invested in, because it doesn't comply with this. I mean, I have a problem with that because obviously somebody invested money and bought the place, and the nature of the insurance plan is, I guess, the nature of the insurance plan. And I'm not sure whether there are plans that'll pay you out only or plans that will only rebuild or whatever, but I'm sure there are options in there. But we're getting in the way, and I appreciate that. The second part, I guess, is when we looked at this in 2016 and made changes, I went, okay, that's pretty good. This is gonna move us forward. And now here we are back in 2020 going, well, not quite. And that's no fault of anybody around the table because we made that decision based on the best information we had on the day. I guess as I'm looking at this, how do we ensure that going forward, if we were to support this and approve it, how do we anticipate what that next problem is? And how do we anticipate what that next issue is? And what are those warning pieces so that we're not leaving residents or developers or owners, whoever it is, in a scenario where they've invested money and they're trapped or locked into something that our bylaws are setting them up for today, where they might be left in a bad spot 4 or 5 years from now, just like the individuals here. So I'm not sure what those indicators are that you look for. Do we wait for residents to look at it? Is there any research that, how long have other cities made these changes? And I guess what I didn't see in here is, I heard that other cities do this, but what I didn't hear is, what are the challenges other cities run into based on these changes they've made, and what do they anticipate? And I think that would be important for me to hear, because yes, they've done it, but a lot of other people have done a lot of other things. What I haven't heard is whether it's been successful or whether it's been able to mitigate some of the challenges or issues here. So I appreciate you went this far. I'm going to say to you, perhaps going 2 more steps to say, where are the cities at now? What are some of the things they're seeing that perhaps is the new set of problems that we're coming? Because I don't think any of these bylaws are going to be perfect. And that's the reality we're dealing with, because economic times change, policies change, life happens, and guess what? Here we are today with COVID, and God knows what will come in 5 years from now. If we're developing like crazy because of some economic upturn, will this withstand that test? And I appreciate that we want to have that permit out the door quicker. We don't want to have people sitting with money waiting to develop and us being the people holding them up. I get that in spades. We've heard that over the years, and I appreciate that this is intended really to maybe speed that process up. But again, it's just having some feedback around, now that cities have used it for 4 years, 5 years, I don't know how long they've used it. What are some of those challenges specifically to this as a result of that change? Because if they haven't had any, hey, that's good news. If they have had some and could do it over again, what would they do different? And perhaps, how would that inform us around this bylaw? Because we're speculating. Right? That's all we're doing. We're doing what ifs.
Yeah, well, what I would respond to that is that this isn't a new concept. Cities have had zoning like this as long as there's been zoning. I mean, even the city like Lloydminster had this up until 2016, and I can't speak to why the change happened. But I'm certainly not aware of any issues that was happening because of it.
Yeah, just to speak to that, Councillor, that's definitely something we can do some more research in and reach out to some of these other municipalities and find out what their issues are with this similar type zoning. The other thing I want to point out is, you talked about what's the next thing. We are looking at redoing our municipal development plan. I shouldn't say redoing, but taking a good hard look at that, bringing that forward for some full overhaul. And this isn't the first thing that we found out with our land use bylaw that's given us some challenges and things that we need to take into consideration. And we'll be bringing forward a new land use bylaw, hopefully as soon as we're done that municipal development plan. So we want to start with the municipal development plan, do a full review and overview of that one, bring that to council, get it adopted, and then we'll be bringing forward a new land use bylaw, which would take these types of things into consideration, as well as some other things within that development plan that got changed in 2016 that some people are questioning why did they get changed. So we got a lot of work to do with our documents, but I fully understand where you're going and the information you'd like to see to come back when we bring it back.
Any other? Councillor Fegman?
Yeah, there's some really good points, on both sides. I know that administration understands the concerns of council, and I have those same concerns because those changes that we did over the last couple of years, we looked at very closely and wanted to make sure that we were making the right decision. So I think there was a lot of research done. But it's interesting when you see that this has already been done. It just changed in 2016 again. So we went many years with this, what we're proposing right now. The question that I've got, I'm just wondering, is there a mechanism for somebody, if they have an R1 and there was a development that was going to be coming through, and of course it wouldn't be coming to council, if a resident had a problem with it, what mechanism do they have to appeal that? Or something like the subdivision appeal board, that type of a thing? Is there?
Yeah, a decision on a development permit, especially a discretionary use application, can certainly be appealed to the SDAB.
Okay. Yeah, so that that makes sense. I get the whole idea on the red tape. I'm a non-red tape guy. I want to get rid of it as much as possible. So I see this as I think that you've been tasked to bring some more information, and that's great. But I do see where you're going with this. Thank you very much.
Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to say, the more we talked about this, the more I can see the value in trying to go with something like this. I just think that we need to strike a slightly different balance of ensuring that council's not abdicating their responsibilities on these items. So we have to find a solution that ensures that at the end of the day, we're the ones being held accountable for these things, because quite often that's really the only tool to do that for a lot of residents. So so long as we can strike that balance, I can see that something like this would work, so long as there's some involvement from us at some level to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing.
Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm learning so much here today, so thank you very much to all of your comments that I've heard from my fellow councillors and mayor and from you as well, Anthony. I think that it would be really important for us, if we were to move this way, to know that there's safeguards in place. So how do we know that properties will conform with that neighborhood and that it's the best decision for that neighborhood? And what's the process that we go through to ensure that? So if it doesn't come to council, then what's the process that you have in place within your departments? I don't need to know that today. I'm just saying that, I'll want to learn that to understand it better. I do recall that the land use bylaw came to your voice a couple of years ago to one of those. Is that correct? And I wondered if changes to the land use bylaw were discussed by the public, or that they had an opportunity to engage in that at that time. And then the other comment I had was around the 14 municipalities that you've already engaged with, was to, as Councillor Dijak asked, what are any of the issues that they're seeing from having this bylaw in place? And maybe that will help us to make a decision that, yes, that's the right route to go, but they're able to manage that well within the bylaw that they have. I think that's all. Thank you.
Left a lot of things for administration to come back to council. I think that we're on the right road. We just need some, definitely some infill, as they say, as you would say, hit this side, just to fill those holes to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, any other comments? Anything from administration, council? Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much for bringing that forward. Moving on to 6.4, it's back through city manager, through Anthony.
All right. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with information pertaining to a proposed amendment to the text of the Land Use Bylaw number 5-2016 respecting the validity of development permits. The Finance Department is currently in the process of reviewing business licensing procedures in order to streamline the permitting process. Prior to the issuance of a business license, a development permit must be obtained to ensure the use complies with the provisions of the Land Use Bylaw. The current provisions state that a development permit is not in effect until 21 days after the notice of decision has been issued, allowing for the expiry of the appeal required by Section 686 of the Municipal Government Act. This means that development or the operation of a use cannot commence within this period. Legal counsel has recommended that Section 2.18 of the Land Use Bylaw, which speaks to validity of a development permit, be amended to allow developments which are unlikely to be appealed by third parties to commence once a development permit is approved. The appeal period would still be in effect. However, development occurring during this time could be done solely at the risk of the proponent. This practice is similar with several other comparable municipalities. Medicine Hat and Lethbridge follow something like this. The draft changes would only apply to developments for permitted uses which comply to all of the provisions of the Land Use Bylaw and would exclude discretionary uses and those requiring any form of variance or relaxation of standards. In addition, the department is proposing to extend the time frame for which a development permit remains valid after the use has become inactive. Currently, the permit is considered void if the use has been discontinued for a period of 6 months. The extension is to extend, or the intended extension would extend that to 12 months to better accommodate seasonal businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just in general, I think on the red tape reduction kind of side of things, I think that this is doing what it needs to do. And, you know, with what we've changed in our business license bylaw, this is kind of one wrinkle that still kind of exists. So I think it would be good to follow through on it. I know you mentioned just permitted uses versus discretionary or other kind of variances, but is that the only items that would really be considered as far as items that are unlikely to be appealed? So what would be unlikely to be appealed? Is there a definition somewhere?
Well, under with the permitted use, the only time that somebody, an affected party, could appeal the decision of a development permit on a permitted use is if the development officer made a misinterpretation, or it could be argued that they misinterpreted the bylaw and approved something that shouldn't have been. So that's thought to be a rare thing. It certainly happens, but you know, it's certainly less common than appeals that might come up with a discretionary use or a situation where there's been a variance or a relaxation of a side yard being reduced from 3 meters to 2.7 or something like that, and the neighboring property is opposed to that. The likelihood of an appeal is, of course, higher.
Any other questions, Councillor? Okay. I'll look around. Anthony, you mentioned that. Oh, did I miss one over here? Councillor White.
Yep. I guess in some situations where it's hard to think of every situation where this could come into play, and I get 21 days, a long time to sit back and do nothing. I think it's a great. I think it's a good move. I think what happens in those situations where somebody does move forward and it does become an appeal, what are the repercussions, for one, or how is that reversed? If I'm understanding this correctly, it could be, would it be on the construction side of stuff where something has already been put into the ground permanently, and then what happens? Something like that.
Yeah, that was definitely our concern as well. This is why we had legal counsel draft this bylaw in its entirety. The idea is that any repercussions would be on that permit holder, the person that's choosing to move forward with their development earlier, as opposed to waiting for that 21-day appeal period to end.
Yep. And I guess my concern or question would be, do we have the oomph to rectify those? Or, because I do remember in a situation where something wasn't meeting the setbacks, and the buildings and the houses were already built and put up, and I get it. By that time, it's too late. And this is at least at the beginning where you have some opportunity to have some recourse or reverse an action. And in those situations, the houses were already built, and there was really either you tear them down fully just because of a couple meters, or move forward with an allowance. But and I guess, so my question is, are we confident that in most situations we have the ability to provide that recourse and rectify if there is an appeal within that? And I'm assuming that this is a very rare case then, like you're saying, this is doesn't happen that often sort of thing. Does it happen that often? Has it happened in the past 5-10 years?
Well, and that's the idea behind this, is that these are very unlikely to have issues arise.
Mm-hmm. Executive Manager.
Yeah, just to add some more context into this, as part of the process, when we looked at our business license process, and Denise could probably speak to this a lot greater than I can, we did a lean process with regards to our business license, how long it takes to get a business license, how long it takes to get reviewed, and everything else. So there's a large amount of business license applications that come through that are basically, I want to call them slam dunks. They're relatively easy. They fit. There's really minimal risk that there would be a review or appeal, and that's where this would apply. If anything was outside of that normal, straightforward business license process, then obviously we wouldn't have them go through this, and we would have make them wait the 21-day referral period. So this is really to give us the ability to move business license out quicker and get them in the hands of those businesses, them assuming a little bit of risk that, in those 21 days, there isn't going to be any major concerns. And that's part of our job on our end, to ensure that, when we're given those directions, that we're confident it's fairly straightforward business license application. So, and again, it's a lot of municipalities do this. Home-based business is one that jumps into my mind. Denise is shaking her head. Yes. So, if I'm applying to have a business license for a home-based business, and I'm not going to have any customers come to my house, so it's basically just my office, home-based business. So there's a bunch of check boxes they would have to answer. So no guests or no customers come into the house, no requirements for parking, all those check off. They would fit into this process where, okay, you can have your business license today, but there is a 21-day referral period where somebody could come back and have concerns, but the risk there is really minimal, and both parties are willing to take that risk on. So
there is is there any bricks and mortar? So, coming to get your permit for business license, development permit, how often does that, or how does that relate to something like a bricks and mortar type of development or something like that?
I think the ones we're talking about, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, would be fairly minimal, if not any. So if you have, let's say you have within a space, you have a certain type of business, and then that business goes away and a new business moves in, our recommendation in that case would be they would wait for the 21-day referral before they proceed with any construction. Okay. These would be very simple, again, home-based businesses, there used to be an ice cream shop in that
Yeah.
space. Now there's a new ice cream shop going in that space. Risk of that is very minimal of having any recourse. We would then put that through this process as well. So, so it's trying to take the easy ones right off the top and get them through the process, get their business license in their hands so they can start conducting business. And any ones that have some question or concern, we would go through the normal process of our current business license. It would be a 21-day referral period. They would wait, and then they would get their approval from there. Denise, did I cover that fairly well?
CFO.
Yes.
Go ahead.
The light, there it is.
Yeah.
Yes, except for the home-based business ones, I think they're looking for additional wording and text amendment for the home-based business ones at a later date. These are just the ones that are 6 months, changing to 12 months for existing use. And like you said, the easy peasy ones that are just going like a retail space that was empty, vacated, and somebody else coming in. We want to be able to increase our success rate in those new businesses getting their business license and not requiring to wait 21 days for a validity period. Anything new with a bricks and mortar would require a development permit and go through the regular process. So they will have to wait because there's a much larger process involved in that from the development permit side.
Any other questions, Councillor White? Good. Anyone else? I think my questions got answered. Councillor Fagin.
Yeah, I think that's this is all part of our goal on the whole streamlining, the whole red tape. I think that anytime a business can get in there sooner and easier, this is what everybody's asking for. And so I love this idea, and especially on the seasonal side of things as well. I think that's great. We've got little businesses that just open up for Christmas or Halloween, and instead of going through the whole process to apply again, it's ridiculous. So this is good common sense to me. We're on the right track. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I particularly like the going from the 6 months to 12 months. I think that's so wise. The other thing I was wondering was if we could learn from the experience of Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. So have they had any issues? Is there something that we should be paying attention to?
That's easy enough to reach out to them and ask them. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it'd be a simple thing to do.
Yeah.
And then because we can't anticipate everything that might happen, and if they have some experience we can learn from, we should take advantage of that. Thank you, Anthony.
Any other comments? Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
We've sent you away with a long list, but thank you very much on both of those.
That's okay. I appreciate the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. Would council entertain a short recess? I'd look to Councillor Diachak. Motion to recess, seconded by Councillor Marin. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll Moving on to item 6.5, I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Worship. So for 6.5, upgraded draft fire service levels policy, I'll ask Fire Chief Lee Sawicki to come forward and present.
Oh, there we go. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council.
Good afternoon, Chief.
Today, Fire Service Administration is here to provide the committee with an updated draft policy for fire service levels. At the November 27th, 2020 Governance and Priorities Committee meeting, the draft fire service levels policy was presented to Council, where recommendations were brought forward with respect to measurables being included in this policy. Fire Service Administration continues to work towards implementing recommendations made by Council, the executive leadership team, and in the Lloydminster Fire Service Master Plan. The City of Lloydminster Fire Service will continue to prioritize the delivery of a comprehensive fire protection model that provides the most effective and efficient level of fire protection services, with focus on education, training, protection, and investigation services, resulting in the best value for the community. And I'll pass this back to the committee for any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Chief. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Chief. So in the draft policy, where are we currently at in enforcing the national building codes, and how's that going to affect our firefighters' workload, your workload, and things moving forward as far as the building code goes?
As far as the building code, sorry?
Yeah.
So currently, our fire prevention and public education initiatives, any code enforcement that we look at is through the National Fire Code. Some of it's referenced back to the building code, which is currently our occupant load calculations. Under the bylaw, it does allow us to enact any orders or changes to the fire code to meet compliance under the charter, 503 and I think 504.
And just the one question I had on clarification, 5.1.8 in that bylaw. We have the next one coming up, of course, right after this. In this one, 5.1.8 says providing rescue services and medical first response.
Yes.
I wondered if that was an inaccurate description, because in the next, when the new fire bylaw comes up next, it's assisting medical first response. I just wondered if am I reading too much into it? Because we're not providing a full-on medical first response. We're assisting in medical first response, like it says in the next one. Is that a...
Yeah, I think we might be reading a little bit too much into that. If it's a wording change in the policy, that's something I think we can go back and make that change to assisting versus providing.
Yeah, because we don't provide that service, or we haven't to this point.
We do currently provide some assistance to EMS services for
and that's what I'm looking for.
Response. So if it is a change in the wording, we can go back and
yeah, the word assistance I think is important under 5.1.8. Sure.
All good?
Yep.
All right, Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Chief, for bringing us an updated version of this. I really think what you have in 5.3, as far as really getting more specific in terms of the level of service that we provide, I think that we're doing a better job of kind of setting a standard and telling the world where that standard is at, so that if your average person is reading this, they know roughly what level of service we're trying to provide. I understand why we had it the other way before in terms of referencing the standards in the NFPA and what have you, but I think this way makes it a lot more clear as to what we're doing. So I appreciate this, and also seeing the two documents here today together, I think makes it a lot more clear as to what we're trying to do, and that we're really accomplishing all that was set out and put in as more or less criticisms within our documents from the fire master plan. All those improvements that need to be made, I feel, are included in those two documents. So
thank you. Thank you.
Chief, 5.2.2, Council has approved a mutual aid and service agreements. It applies to being outside the city. Can you just bring council up to speed, because being a new council, to make sure we're all on who are neighbors that are currently covered, or how, just to refresh everybody's memory of what currently exists?
Sure. So currently, from what I've been able to understand, is the current agreements we have right now are with Britannia, Wilton, and Legacy Fire Department. We're currently working on coming up with an agreement with the County of Vermilion River.
And that would be direct mutual aid, or would that be service agreements?
Mutual aid or service agreement.
Okay. And then how does the fire department fit into EMO from that perspective of, does that fall under something different if under Jordan we have signed, I believe, a mutual aid agreement on a bigger scale, but how does the fire department fall into that from your understanding?
I think I'll
defer that to city clerk.
Ask the city clerk if he can.
Absolutely. So Lloyd Fire Services' first responsibility is the city of Lloydminster. Should one of our neighboring jurisdictions have an issue, we have a mutual aid agreement for those. It's important to note that even though we're still working on one with the County of Vermilion River, should they require assistance, we would still work with them to provide that assistance. Should jurisdiction enact a state or local emergency and request assistance, that would be done through the POC in Edmonton, or through Saskatchewan Emergency Management. They would then go out to all local fire services and ask for that assistance to be provided. Of course, location and those type of things would come into play on those, but the greater state of emergency management would come through there in the same way that if there was emergency in the city and we requested those assets, we would request them through the POC and they would come back down to us.
Thank you. No, just I think it's important that everybody that sits around this table, new and people that have been here before, just clearly understand what commitments we have to our neighbors, the neighbors have to us, and the relationships that exist.
And if I use POC and it's Provincial Operations Center, sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments regarding 5.6.5, the service levels policy? Not seeing any more, we'll move to 6.6, back through the city manager, through to the fire chief, the draft fire bylaw.
Great, thank you. Again, good afternoon. The fire service is here to provide the committee with a draft revision of fire service bylaw number 25-2015. In 2015, City Council passed bylaw number 25-2015, which outlined a process for how the Lloydminster Fire Service and public will operate with regards to fire protection in the city. Over the last few years, the fire service has seen significant changes, which requires a review of the current fire bylaw. This review will allow the department to meet changing standards, operational efficiencies, growth, and recommendations made within the fire service master plan. Some area of changes to the bylaw include authorities of the fire chief and delegates, fire prevention programs and procedures, requirements to report incidents, fire permits, and fire bans. I'll pass this back to the committee again for any questions or comment.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Okay. I just wanted a couple clarifications for starters. 5.4.6, commandeer privately owned equipment for the protection of persons and property. Where would we ever enact that?
Could be where we require a piece of equipment from that business or sorry?
I could probably clear this up. The simple enactment is, say, let's say we need to clear an area because there's an incident occurring and we need a bulldozer. We would commandeer that bulldozer in order to do that. That doesn't mean that the individual we commandeer that bulldozer from wouldn't get compensated for commandeering, but that's sort of the idea behind that.
Okay.
Thank you.
6.3. I assume that we're anytime cause of any vehicle to be removed. This is something that's parked in front of a fire hydrant, something that's impeding the ability for our fire services to do their job, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. 7.6. The lock boxes. Now, I'll preface this by saying down later on, it gives a year before we're going to enact this a year from when the bylaw gets third and final reading. Where are we at today with these lock boxes? My thought around it is, I wanted to know where we were. Do we have a key that's a standardized from the city of Lloydminster way that we're going, instead of having the guys have 17 different lockbox keys, is that external lockbox something that the city can say, we want all these external lockboxes keyed the same, so that works?
Yes. The lockbox program basically states that with the buildings that are specified within the bylaw, a standardized lockbox or fire department lockbox acceptable to the fire service is mounted externally to the building. It is a one key lock process that the fire department only has a specific number of keys. They're not within the rest of the city, so we can control access in and out of those lock boxes.
And standard practice that these lock boxes are done at the owner's expense, not the city's.
Yeah, there's a specific specification, and we're looking into that right now.
And then the other thing I liked about that was the 1 year notice of saying that we're not going to start enforcing these things until a year from now. I just wanted to make note that I wanted to make sure there was good communication sent out to all the businesses that this follows, because there's a specific set of things where a lockbox is required.
Yeah.
And making sure that everybody in the community knows that that's something that's coming forward a year from the time that this bylaw goes forward.
Right. So we're working with, on an educational program for the lockbox program, and we've been working with economic development to get information out to those specific businesses.
Okay. Under 14.4, to assist in cost recovery, that one, inspections and enforcement of the National Fire Code, a surcharge of 10% of the building permit value is hereby attached. Where are we now? What are we doing today?
So currently we don't have anything in place, and we'll be working with finance on how to implement that 10% surcharge based on the building permit process.
Yes, I thought that was a new thing. So yes. I think that's another piece that really needs to be communicated properly to the public.
Yeah.
As we make a change like that. Under Schedule B, so we start to talk about the billing and so on and so forth. We've talked about this numerous times, and now it's coming to us for the first time. The false alarm calls under 14.1. My question is, I've dealt with this in a different jurisdiction as well, so it's of keen interest to me. Okay, first alarm is free, second alarm is no charge, third alarm is $300. When does that, or does it, reset?
We're doing it we're looking at a calendar year per calendar year. It's just the easiest way for us to track the number of calls per year. I think if we're going on a 12-month incident, it's going to be onerous on us to ensure when the 12 months started and when the 12 months end. So we'll keep it on a calendar year basis.
So it'll always kind of reset January 1st. You're on a new clean slate again.
Yeah.
Right. Because you could have, the other thing I was thinking about in there is, if it's the same hallway smoke alarm every single time and they've never dealt with it,
yeah,
even though it's a 3 and reset, right?
Right.
Is there some provisions within the bylaw to go after that thing? Because if it's the hallway smoke alarm today, but it's the basement smoke detector tomorrow, are we basing it on where it is or just a general alarm?
It's general alarm, not based on location. Okay. So during our alarm responses, we do attend to confirm false alarm, and that's where we'll try to start educating the public on, location of their smoke alarms or fire detectors within the building.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up in here, and I'm not sure where we're going to have it fall, but we provide an exceptional service in our city for the fire services. And I think the public expects a certain level of service. However, the costs of running our fire department have really escalated over the last couple of years as we've gone from what they call a volunteer to a composite type department. And at what point does the taxpayer have to continue to subsidize those rising costs? There's a lot that we can do to offset, or some things we can do to offset those costs. I wondered where within this bylaw, where you have, for example, an SGI prescribed rate of $9.53.59 per hour of payback to the fire department. That's whether you roll 1 truck and 2 guys or 5 trucks and 10 guys, doesn't matter. That's what they're paying, right? So are we within this? Are we going to start going to the rescue calls and the vehicle fires and things like that? Are we going to start getting a revenue back in on that to help offset those costs? Same with the house fire. Or, we're billing the insurance company. We're not billing the homeowner directly. It's going through their insurance as long as they have it. At what point can we start to recoup some of the continuing escalating costs of providing this service to the community, or can we?
So currently this year, we have recovered some costs for services that are outside our basic fire protection needs within the city. Under this bylaw, it does allow us to look at recovery of costs to, again, other incidents that we didn't cover off within the previous bylaw for services outside our basic fire protection needs. So rescue, dangerous goods, outside fire investigators that need to come in for large dollar loss fires and things like that, we can recover those costs back through this bylaw.
Yeah, I think if we're reviewing this bylaw, this is the time to think about this and discuss it, because I truly think that the taxpayer shouldn't take the full burden of, we're busier and we're bigger, and this is happening more and more. And I'm not certain that the taxpayer should take the full brunt of this without us doing our due diligence on our side to try and recover some costs that we incur for doing it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question, and we have taken steps to look at added options of cost recovery for fire services.
City Clerk, and then I'll get to Councillor Torres.
Just as council is aware, traditionally the philosophy has been that a taxpayer pays for the basic service. So the fire department that rolls up to their house to put out that house fire is sort of covered under their general taxation as part of that service. That's the philosophy that's gone forward. That's why the bylaw continues with that basic philosophy, but also looks at motor vehicle collisions, extrication, environmental type of issues that aren't covered by those general taxation and those service requirements. That's sort of where this bylaw went. Council wanted to change that philosophy and look at those cost recoveries in a more deeper area that we certainly would incorporate that.
Councillor Torres.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment as far as Councillor Buckingham, as far as the user pay model, we'll say, of fire services, is that taxpayers all the same end up paying that. It ends up going through their insurance premiums rather than through the city directly, which, whether that's right or wrong, at the end of the day, it's all coming from the same place. So I understand why you would maybe go in that direction versus also going in this direction, but at the same time, it really, I think, gets you to the same place. But other than that, I do kind of appreciate a somewhat of a user pay model that does exist within what we're doing, where there's a base level of service, and then for things that are, costly to the city, like these false alarms, having that scaling up and giving opportunity for correction and education, and then ultimately charging them. I still think that those are good things to have within this. And those are the ones that, kind of stand out to me as us still doing the right thing by all taxpayers' account, in that your average taxpayer is not having to pay that premium for all the extra costs that come with going with those, and that there's some incentive put onto property owners to take care of their own kind of property and not just have everyone pay their bill for them. Thank you. I think it's good, and I think it works really well with the other policy as well.
Councillor Buckingham, I apologize. I think you've got some more questions.
That's okay. Yeah, I just, I'm just curious what we would do going forward. I'll just say it. Are we leaving money on the table by not sending a bill to the insurance company when we have a house fire that the city could get paid back for?
I think my concern with making it a 100% user pay system would defeat the purpose of somebody calling 911 in the event of an emergency. I think that if they're worried that they're going to get a bill, they're not going to call 911. And I don't want to go down that road of not having somebody call in the event of an incident.
Nope, an absolutely valid, 100% valid concern, for sure. I just wanted, while we're having this discussion, I wanted to have these discussions because, like I said, we need to continue to be wary and cognizant of the costs of providing these services. And I hate that we're having that discussion at all, but it still needs to be had.
Absolutely. Councillor Diachak.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I guess as we're talking about that, I was thinking about, I know in discussions with people are using ambulances, they're going, I can't afford the ambulance, so I'll drive myself. And so that discussion is happening in certain places around that service, exactly to your point. I'm not totally familiar with the SGI payments and the like that do occur in Saskatchewan, and I'm not sure how they came to be or whatever, but and I'm not sure under what circumstances that fee is applied and whatever sort of that is out there. But I guess one is I believe it's up to us to look at all the revenue sources that are potentially available to us. But secondarily, I think, as the city clerk has pointed out philosophically, straying too far from where we're at can create that model where people are reluctant to reach out. I mean, people do things for a lot of different reasons, and I guess the last thing I'd want to do is someone not call for fire assistance, and you have several homes burned down in a community as opposed to just one. So I mean, the ramifications that sort of roll out, sort of go further out there, that you actually have more problems created as a result of that. But I mean, certainly I've heard about vehicles, highway accidents, and claims in that regard. I'd want to see that one explored a little more. But certainly around the house fires, I would agree. I'm just reluctant to begin to create a mindset where, you've paid your taxes, this is what's here to do, and we have a service that's, the best we can provide for you to make it happen.
Yeah. No, thank you for the comment. Yeah. And currently, right now, in the bylaw that we're presenting does take into account those concerns that you have.
Chief, I've got a few myself here. As I looked at 5.3, and actually starts at 5 as your responsibility as the chief. And then I was wondering, does it need to have the word the fire chiefs or their designate added to all those duties? Because I get down to 6.5 and you may delegate the authority under the bylaw, but I don't know, and I'll look to the city clerk as well. Is that a duplication of the terms? But just because there's one individual as the fire chief. You have an assistant chief. You have the ability, I believe, to designate these to captains or whoever potentially at the fire department. Does it need to clearly state that? Because if you're going to authorize someone to have those specific powers, if you want to call it that, or responsibilities, does it need to be cleaned up? And it's just a wording thing. And I like I say, I got to 6.5 and I went, okay, it's there, but does it need to be starting at 5.2, I guess, and then down 5.3, wherever it says the fire chief, need to say, or their designate.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've had lots of discussions around that, and under the definition right now for fire chief, it does say person appointed by the city clerk as the fire chief, or any other person designated by the fire chief to act on their behalf. But I think it's something that we can definitely go back and look at cleaning up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's as clear as we can be there on that one.
Yeah.
Councillor Buckingham mentioned 7.6. I was curious if this was something new I was not familiar with or had heard about in that process. But you addressed that. I appreciate that and the key information. Down to 8.2, and this is one that's always been near and dear to my heart due to some of my past, is the storage of dangerous goods in this city, within the city limits. How do you know who's storing what? Does planning reach out to you and say, I have company X that wants to be a chemical storage facility for cleaning products, B, oil field products, C, swimming pool products? How does that commute from one department to another?
So currently, right now, I'm not sure what the fire service has done in the past. Right now, we are looking at working with economic development to find out what businesses and organizations are storing specific chemicals. Some of that would be done through fire pre-planning. Where we're at that level with fire pre-planning yet might be a little ahead of, we're not probably at that level yet to go out and do pre-planning of those specific industries, but we are working with economic development right now.
Okay.
So I was going to add, isn't a requirement by law around WMIS reporting? So there's got to be a central repository somewhere that has a WMIS report of chemicals that are being stored individually.
It's not actually, I don't think it's under WMIS. Yeah, WMIS is the required training you have to use the products and be around the products, but that's why
I don't necessarily think it's, there's requirement to report for the transportation of dangerous goods, but the storing of dangerous goods, I'm not 100% sure on.
So I guess my question, and I don't want to create more red tape as we continue to talk about that, but is there something we need to link planning / business licenses? Because if someone takes out a business license and says, I'm going to be storing chemicals, how do we get that to your department just to close that loop? Because the last thing you want is a new business to open and 30 days later, you guys have to go into something that you have no clue even existed. And that's just an area that may not be in the bylaw, but I think it's got that overlapping and
Yeah.
cross links with several other departments in the city. So I'll leave
Yep.
that one for a takeaway.
Yep.
I'm just going to run through my list here. I guess you did talk about 14.4, and that was the new 10%. What else? Then I get into the fines. So back to the false alarms, Chief. Maybe I'm being a little, I don't know what the right word is to describe, but $300 for a third time to somebody for a false alarm. With the amount of equipment, and again, paid for by the taxpayers. Those people are paid taxpayers, but where do we send a message? Because in the whole perspective of fines, it should be that's a deterrent. Really, a fine is a deterrent for someone. So we've been at $300. We're going to carry at $300. Would there be some value at looking at doubling that to $600 and for the fourth and greater to $1,000? Because we're rolling to the door 4 firefighters that are trained to the best of their ability. We've got the best equipment. It's paid for by taxpayers. Go back to that. But at what point does that fine actually send a serious message? You have a problem and you need to deal with that problem. I'm looking for your input on this.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think the fine schedules that we put in the appendices here, we basically looked at several municipalities, both across Alberta and Saskatchewan. We basically took an average of what most other municipalities are looking at. If it's something that council would like us to go back and relook at from a fine standpoint, that's definitely something that we can go back and look at.
City Clerk?
Just so council's aware, traditionally the higher the fine tends to lead people to go to court more often to dispute the fine, which would require our fire department now to not only respond to the emergency, but to now spend time in court to deal with that. One of the things that I just thought of as I was looking at this, perhaps maybe we have a commercial and residential, we set the fines based on a commercial and residential fine base, if that would be maybe a direction, higher for commercial and lower for residential.
And a good point, City Clerk, and I appreciate that very much, because I looked at a drive vehicle over equipment, and that's namely hose. And it doesn't do hose very much good from my past as a volunteer firefighter, and a $200 thing. Well, that's no big deal. It's a little more than the parking ticket. And, we kink up some hose. You're not going to even replace that length of hose or the damage that is done to other pieces. So that one jumped out at me. And I guess the third one was into the 7.5 under the neglect to maintain an automatic sprinkler system, specific extinguishing system, or fire alarm system. And again, $500. If it's going to cost them a little more for the fine to get them to get serviced, I don't know. That's that same question that's page 16 of the bylaw, 7.5.
Sorry, which
7.5, the neglect to maintain the automatic sprinkler system. And there's oh, sorry, you're right. Okay, I realize that now. Thank you very much. Third item down, neglect to maintain the automatic sprinkler system, special extinguishing system, or fire alarm system. They're all pretty much the same, 500, 1,000, 2,000. But I just wondered if that one, because of the nature of that, those are bigger buildings in specific. To have a sprinkler system, there's some valuables, namely human life, but also other items there. From that perspective, with that, is that one within range? And I guess same question, if you've looked at it and compared it to other places. But I just think that there needs to be some incentive. But I do hear what the city clerk said, because when you find somebody enough money, they will show up at court, and you're going to have to go and or designate again and go through the process of preparing the defense or prosecution's information.
Yeah. So one of the things we did do this year, we did issue a ticket for that $5,000 fine issue this year. So, and it was for having an inoperable fire alarm system during an event. So I think it's there. We haven't heard anything back from a court standpoint, but we do have the ability to use them.
I certainly hear what Councillor Buckingham says, and I heard again what Councillor Diachuk said, some comments from the city clerk. I've got some reservations about not charging insurance companies, because I carry a rider on my insurance. I didn't even know it was there until we were sitting down here a little while ago that says we're allowed up to $25,000 fee to pay for a fire department to fight a fire in our home. I'm expecting if we have a fire, the deductible is already going to be taken care of, so that's just part of it. It's going to increase the claim, which may lead to increased costs. It's something I think we need to certainly be aware of. I don't have the answer either, and I know you don't have the specific answer, nor administration. I think we could have this discussion. At the end of the day, I want people to know that if they need the fire service is there. Even if it's the after the fact, then we discuss if they have insurance to cover the firefighting. But I wouldn't want to miss it that option was here should a council further, this council or another council wants to go down that road potentially and look at it, because we're going to continue to face the cost challenges that you're aware of, and we're all aware of. Everything's costs more. I'm sure the next fire truck, because dollar exchange, if the dollar doesn't improve, is going to be significantly higher than the last fire truck that we bought. So it's just, we're going to continue to feel pressures, and fire service isn't one of those that has a high revenue. And you've indicated that there's some, you've got some opportunities here, which is good. Some cost recovery is good when it costs people that are not taxpayers in particular, but there's options to bill. I think that's the one that I would like to at least explore, so that we know that we can say, do we go to the taxpayers for a 2% tax increase for fire protection services, or we have a revenue stream that we believe we can kind of cushion that to 0.5% as an example. Just simply hypothetical, but something I think we need to be able to look at.
No, appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just as far as the enforcement around the building code, I just wanted some clarity around which building code we're enforcing, because I think our council, and just in the past year or two, we adopted either the 15 or the 16 building code. So then is that the building code we're enforcing, or is there a fire portion of like a national building code that we're mandatory?
We're enforcing, the current national building code and the current national fire code.
That are enforced within Lloydminster?
That are enforced in Lloydminster.
Okay. Yeah, there's just some confusion around there if there's any specific fire code part of a building code that you would have to follow.
Yeah, I think it's 2015, but just so I'm clear on that, and just make sure all council, Chief, if the building, you went into a building and it was built in 1947 and nothing's been changed, that's the code that the building would be at.
Code of the day, unless there has been any significant renovations up to 75% of the building.
So does it get messy as far as electrical codes or anything like that? Because the electrical codes, as I understand, are different on one side of the border from the other. Because
so from the fire service side standpoint, we don't necessarily look at the electrical code. If there's something that stands out as an electrical concern, we'll note it as a fire hazard, and it'll have to be rectified to meet that specific electrical code, and then it would have to have an electrical inspector come in to take a look at that.
Okay, and then within your investigation, you may find something that appears to be an electrical code violation or something.
So really the only reason we have the National Building Code referenced in the bylaw is based on occupancy load. It has specific calculations under that for, not so much under the fire code, but it references the building code.
But and then there's nothing really within the investigation side of things?
No.
Okay.
We enforce the fire code, not necessarily the building code. The building code is for occupant load.
Thank you. Clear as mud.
Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 3 very simple questions. And so I'm curious if the funds generated from the fines go into general revenues, or are they designated to protective services? That's one question. The second one would be, how many false alarms do we have in a year? And what is our cost to actually attend to those false alarms?
Your first question, I think I'll defer to Denise if she wouldn't mind answering the question on where the funds go from any revenue. I can answer your second question to the best of my ability. We're probably in and around that 25% mark as being false alarms. The actual number, I'd actually have to come back and bring back to you with an actual number.
And then the third question was, what's our cost to attend to those false alarms? Like our actual hard cost to go?
Sorry?
Our hard cost to go to a false alarm. So rolling a truck up.
So most of our false alarms are sent with 1 truck and 4 staff. We're staffed 24/7 with that 1 truck of 4 people. So whatever our costs are, We'd probably have to break it down per truck and per member. I mean, most of our incidents range in and around 15 to 20 minutes for a false alarm.
So I see the city clerk might be able to give you.
I think the bigger danger with a false alarm is our fire services respond as if it's a real alarm. And whenever you put a truck of that size down a road with emergency lights, you create some dangers to the public as well as to our fire service members. And that's the greater danger behind a false alarm, because they continue to respond as if it's a real alarm until they realize or until they're notified that it's not. So that's the non-monetary cost to the danger of a false alarm.
CFO, could you enlighten us to question number one? I believe it's around where the fines that are generated from the fire department end up.
Sometimes it doesn't. Is it on now?
There it is.
You were looking for, your question was to do with where does the revenue go for false alarms?
For all of the penalties that are paid, or?
So they would go directly as income against the fire department and reduce the effect on the bottom line for taxpayers.
Good.
However, if I could clarify, earlier you were discussing building code and additional fees. Part of when we were doing the lien process, we were identifying how we can improve from a customer perspective the business license process. In addition, some other communities that we are kind of modeling from, they've included in the fire services inspections and stuff as part of the business online. So you go online and get your business license, you get your development permit, and you do the fire inspection, all as part of that. It's not something we can do very quickly. However, it is something that we have identified that it might be a nice to have as we continually improve the process.
All right. Any other questions for the fire chief? Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you very
much. Keep up the great work. Moving on to 6.7, the city manager.
Thank you, Worship. For 6.7, draft debt management for capital projects policy, I'll turn it over to the CFO, Denise McDonald, to present.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Before you is the debt management for capital projects policy. The purpose of it is to establish parameters of debt financing for capital projects, to maintain a balance between financing needs and requirements, establish guiding principles and controls of new debt while supporting the city's long-term capital plan. The main items, I won't go through the whole thing because I imagine you've read most of it, but the main items are, if you look at 4.3 in the policy, where considering debt, the city must also consider intergenerational equity and shall be structured in a way that is both fair and equitable to those that pay and benefit from the underlying assets. So in reality, reserves are the past taxpayers. Taxation, current taxation, the current taxpayers are paying. Debt allows us to distribute some of the cost to future taxpayers. And then, of course, there's offsite levies, which allow to cover growth by people adding to the growth. Timing, type, and term of debt shall be determined with the objective of minimizing the long-term costs to the city. A multi-year debt guideline and corresponding debt servicing scheduling funding strategy shall be maintained and consistent with the city's long-term capital plans and various master servicing plans. Capital projects are subject to debt financing and will be considered and approved in the annual budget process. Debt requires an authorized borrowing bylaw. That's typical in not only the charter but in the Municipal Government Act. New debt issuance shall identify funding sources and debt repayment schedules. And then we get into some more details in that we would look at borrowing only for construction, purchase, and replacement of major restoration of infrastructure with an individual project value exceeding $1 million. The second item on there says that we would not finance the purchase of machinery and equipment such as vehicles through long-term debt, and and it shall not exceed the probable lifetime of the capital property or useful life, and it needs to still meet that $1 million threshold. So we may consider large heavy equipment such as emergency equipment or graders equipment that would have to exceed that $1 million threshold. Prior to entering in any lease financing agreements, an analysis shall be prepared that assesses the costs as well as the financial and other risks associated with the proposed lease compared to other methods of financing. Cost of debt financing associated with growth-related capital projects must be supported through future development levies where allowed by the Lloydminster Charter. Under debt categories, we have tax-supported debt will be issued for capital projects related to tax-supported operations. Local improvements supported debt is issued to capital projects that are benefit specific properties pursuant to a approved local improvement plan. And user fee supported debt is issued to utility operations or recreational infrastructure. Under debt restrictions, the city further restricts the debt limit of the municipality to 75% of the maximum allowable amount. Exceptions would be legislative or regulatory requirements related to environmental or safety matters or an unexpected emergency or disaster. Debt issuance, terms, and repayment. Unless there's more advantageous interest rates can be attained elsewhere, the city shall obtain capital financing funds through the sale of the debentures through the local air authorities capital fund act. It has been renamed from the Alberta Capital Financing Authority, has been taken under the Treasury and is now under the Act of Local Authorities Capital Act. When establishing debt terms, we shall consider the cost minimization, availability of debt servicing funding, intergenerational equity, capital life cycle implications, long-term financial stability, and financial flexibility. When a debenture is fully paid and retired, the city shall assess, this is not that they must, but we will assess the viability of maintaining equivalent payments into capital reserves. The city shall report on an annual basis the debt and debt service limit. The debt limit, the debt, and the debt service limit. And we currently do that in our annual audit financial statements. The city shall report on debt-related financial ratios on a periodic basis, which may include debt to capital, debt to taxable property value, debt service payments as a percentage of general fund revenue or expenditures. And certainly, and we're interested in hearing if council has other ratios that you would like us to report on. Other than that is the standard penalty and responsibility clauses that we are standard to our policies. Open to council's questions.
Thanks, CFO. Questions, comments? Councilor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Everyone was giving me a funny look as though I wasn't going to mention anything. But yes, I think that there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think that 75% is probably, the kind of the comfort level of where it's on the high side, I guess, for what you might see in other municipalities. The others might have it. I've seen it a bit lower, I guess, but based on what we've got in the works, I think 75% is maybe a little bit closer to reality in terms of what our max ought to be, because we know that we may be getting up to the 50% region not that far from now, and then there's other items that may need to be paid for. But overall, I think that what we've got here and kind of setting out some structure as far as what are the good uses of debt, I think is a wise decision. I think especially when we look at ensuring the life cycle of the things that we're buying with it and what their purpose is overall is clear with what, is a good use of debt. You know, any future council can change this obviously and go in whatever direction they want, but I think in terms of stating where I'm at and where I would like to see, I think that this does a really good job of identifying what are the good uses of debt. It's a tool in our toolbox, like many others, of how to finance the city. But if it's not used correctly or carefully, it can put a city in an extremely kind of dangerous position. You look at places like Detroit where they went bankrupt because they didn't necessarily have, well, they had a bunch of other issues that I hope we don't have, but still, you can get yourself into trouble if you don't use debt correctly. So using it on the items that we've identified in here, like long-term asset replacements and reflecting their life cycle and the value in terms of how we would actually go about using them, how they'll be supported from what fees or revenues, I think is good to identify to make sure that we're having a way to pay that debt back. You know, there's going to be an awkward couple of years here coming up where you're going to see a lot of the city's finances, one way or another, are going to be coming, a certain portion are going to be going towards interest. So using debt appropriately and ensuring that you're not loading up too much means you don't have to raise taxes so much or raise fees so much that, you know, it no longer becomes a kind of a competitive or a place that people can afford to actually live. So I think that we're striking the right balance and knowing and understanding that we're going to be actually taking on a lot more than we have right now, or a lot more than we've had in the past. But we have to do that with our wastewater treatment plant, and we have several other facilities. One of the other items that's not on here that I'm just kind of curious about is things that you know, kind of feel almost more like maintenance and replacement type of items. I know we talk about over $1 million value, but you know, in a scenario where you have your water and sewer program, we just wanted to do more for whatever reason in a current year. Putting something like that as long-term debt, I don't know that I feel like something like that should be identified as the types of things. So if it's kind of maintenance and replacement, are we really making it clear enough that maintenance or replacement of cast iron pipe in the ground or something like that isn't necessarily the best use of debt? But I think we're striking a pretty good balance of how we've defined it to give people flexibility. So I don't know. I'm still thinking about that as we go through it. But I think that it identifies a lot of important things as far as intergenerational equity. We want to get the benefit of something now, but we don't necessarily want to put the whole burden onto future generations. But at the same time, you know, taking on that debt and using it over the life cycle of that asset is sometimes a good way to fund it. So anyway, only real potential criticism type item would be just in the debt categories area where we talk about tax supported debt, local improvement, and user fee. When we talk about recreational infrastructure, I don't know that there are going to be many that will be able to support the debt that comes with them, because I don't think any of our recreation outside of the golf course is not tax supported one way or another. You know, the return on a pool or something, let's say, is 30% user fees, 70% tax supported. So I get a little confused when we talk about that area, because we're referring to user fee supported as recreational infrastructure, but it would most definitely be a combination of user fee and tax supported.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find some better wording for that.
But that's it. Thank you.
Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, thanks, Worship. I guess the only other thing I was thinking about is that in some years when you have, you know, the cold snaps and it warms up and it freezes and it warms up, and, you know, God forbid you have 3 or 4 blocks that are blown up with water lines because of that shift in the Earth's crust or whatever it is. Where does that fit in? Are we going to just pull from reserves, or is that also an option where we'd look at borrowing? I mean, you know, it's sort of to your point, I guess, Councillor Torson, around this piece, but when we budget replacement of water lines, whatever that we're going to do, and then we have these emergencies that emerge because of the weather and forcing pipes to move around, is that another option for us, or I'm just trying to speculate as to where we fit this in, because we do want to keep reserves in place because they been put in place for specific purposes, and then striking the balance and saying, but you know what, So I don't remember what the numbers are, but if you're going to do a block, it's probably $1 million to do the water line. And you have a couple, 2-3 blocks of that, and you're like, where do you get the money from?
So our current infrastructure for the ground is generally supported by grants, and for the most part, we haven't used reserves since I've been here to support those projects. So if for instance, we had planned to do a certain amount of work and we have 2 blocks that actually blow up or whatever, then yes, we'd have to then look at, is there other grants we could use, or we would use something like this. However, if you want me to include it as maintenance, then you wouldn't be able to do that. Right now, the idea of the threshold would be to ensure that it's a significant project, that we're not borrowing for small items. We've have a few on the books that are like under 300,000, that perhaps borrowing for smaller projects isn't the best idea.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it needs to be in there. I don't know what the best way to deal with it, or should it be included. I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but I mean, you have a bad year and you have a bad year, and so how do you find your way through that, I guess.
Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Couple questions or clarifications, I guess. How do you see the debt categories being used as requests come forward? Is it just something that's in here to help clarify, or do you plan to in future budgets say that this debt is coming from user fees, this debt's coming from, is that, or is it just something in there that, is there something that we can use with those 3 categories that's going to help us define the debt, to use it differently, or just categorize it differently?
You're asking me to explain the difference between the debt categories?
Like I see that there. Is it being used differently? Is that?
It's just to define that there's just 3 different categories. One is tax supported, so it comes from your tax rates. Local improvements would be to, do sidewalk or infrastructure to a specific area. The DARP might be another one that, you could do local improvements to a specific benefiting principal area. And then user fees would have some money associated with it. So your utilities or water treatment plant or something like that, you would increase your utility fees. Or in the case of recreation, you would combine it with taxes and user fees.
Yep. I understand the difference in the 3. I guess just curious if would they be coming to us? Would debt and future debt be coming to us in different categories?
So as we're doing like a 10-year planning and we have projects coming up, then out of those projects we have to identify, okay, is this a debenture that's going to be tax supported, or is it going to be user fee supported? So we have to take that into consideration as what are the revenue sources when we're doing these capital projects, and how are we going to fund it, and who is going to be affected by it. That's part of our decision-making process. And by having a policy, it helps ensure that you check all the boxes off, that you don't go ahead with a project without considering, are we putting forward a capital project that requires funding for our future people, and we're asking our current taxpayers to pay the full cost?
Yeah, because I guess I'm, what Jonathan has brought forward or mentioned is that there is, the user fee supported debt is going to be, as for instance, the wastewater treatment plant, a very small portion of that is going to come out of the user fee supported debt. Do you take a lump sum of debt and split it up between different categories, or do you?
Well, the utility model is we're working towards self-supporting. So any debt to the water, wastewater, landfill, stormwater, I think stormwater is an odd one because it isn't often associated with utilities. But the utilities are self-supported. So any increase in debenture will hit the user fees directly, not taxpayers. It's a different group of people.
Okay. Yep.
But user fees are supported by a combination of taxes as well as recreation, is supported by taxes, plus, because they're usually a deficit for each facility.
Right.
as well as user fees for the people accessing the service. And they generally do not pay 100% of the cost for that facility.
Right.
So that means the taxpayer picks it up in taxes.
Yeah.
So you have to identify who's going to be paying for that and how it affects them. And then if we're able to look at our regional partners and see, okay, how much of this is for our residents and how much are we providing to our neighboring residents, and identify how can we reach out to our neighbors and see if they will pay a portion of those recreational costs. So anytime we do any kind of capital project, we have to identify where those revenue sources are coming from and how we can support it before you go ahead and do a debenture. Because if it costs too much money in the current year, you're going to have to spread that cost out over a number of years. Right now, there isn't a policy on the books, so we're just coming to council with how do we fund this, right?
Right. Yep. And the only other thing I wanted to is kind of a wording clarification for, I guess, mainly for myself, just the difference between shall and must. And when I look through here, where that comes into play for me is when we talk about long-term plans and that sort of stuff. 4.5, it says a multi-year debt guideline, corresponding debt servicing schedule and funding strategy shall be maintained and consistent with the city's long-term plan. Stuff like that, because 75% is a maximum, and we would hope that we don't have to get up to that point or anything like that. And we would always be taking into consideration multi-year plans as far as infrastructure and debt servicing and all that sort of stuff. Those pieces are very critical and should be done. Should those be incorporated and followed or stated a little bit more stringent in here, or just a comment, I guess?
The word shall is equivalent to must in
this.
Is it?
Yeah. Okay.
The may, in the cases where it says may consider, we might do it.
Yeah. Good to know.
Any other questions or comments? CFO, the one I would just like to comment on, appreciate the reporting. I think it's very important that the council and the community know where we're at. With what is stated annually, the debt limit, debt, and the debt service limit, I think that's something as a member of the elected side, I would like to see that if there was any other reports coming forward, be it quarterly, monthly, just at the front of it, just to be front and center to remind us how much debt we're carrying, when those debts come off, and as you have in the past. I think that to me is very important as we look at other pieces to the puzzle, because we have this limit that we're basically been following the 75. Now we're looking at a policy. It just puts all those numbers that are current as well as when debt is coming off, because it's always something that, sure. From my perspective anyways, I don't know about the rest of council, I always look at and say, okay, we're getting rid of that in 2026, frees up some room and things like that. So it's just, anytime a report comes forward, I would love to see that as the lead sheet to these others, because
I think we did put it in the third quarter financial report to council, as well as we put it in the budget reporting. So it was more than just annual, but I can put it in here to be quarterly. That was our goal anyway. Yeah, and that goal, if there's any other reports, like I say, as you referred to at 9.2, I would appreciate that very much. Any other questions or comments? Councilor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just my one other question was just around the section 4.9. Just because we talk about the projects, individual projects exceeding $1 million, is that an or with some of those other areas? So we talk about lease financing and things like that, but you could be talking about lease financing for some things where it may be beneficial, and you've done that calculation to go with lease financing rather than outright purchasing something. But that wouldn't necessarily have to be over $1 million for you to go with that option, would you?
I guess that would be part of your analysis, right? Are you saying the $1 million is too high if it's leasing?
Just you could run into scenarios where leasing something rather than buying
Yeah.
would be less than $1 million, but you're saying that you're still going to run through that exercise prior
Yes.
to leasing.
Yes, and we may consider then maybe purchasing it from reserves or something instead of leasing if the cost analysis says you're paying too much by doing a lease agreement rather than purchasing directly.
So my question is it possible to lease something that's less than $1 million if it's favorable within this policy?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought, is it was saying all of these things will be considered. But thank you.
Any other questions for the CFO? Thank you very much, CFO. That moves us to item 7. I'll look for inquiries from the media, please. Thank you very much. I'll look for a motion to recess. Motion to recess, Councillor Diachuk, seconded by Councillor Fagnan. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We are recessed.